Hello, welcome to the Katie Halper Show. So excited to be here with you guys. It's a new day, and it is a great day, and excited to be here with Sam Alkoff, my co-host. Was I not supposed to say your last name?
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine,
That's
right?
who I
Okay,
am. Yeah.
It is who you are. Yeah, with Sam Alkoff is his name indeed. And we have a great show for you guys today. This is the Katie Halper Show, as you know. Let me just take a deep breath. Hold on. How are you, Sam?
I'm taking a deep breath with you.
All right, good. How's it going?
We're in deep breath moment.
Yeah.
Have some peace. Okay. How am I doing? I think like a lot of people, I'm still in mourning because of the India Walton election in Buffalo. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that. And so I'm very interested about what's happening in Nicaragua because to some extent, I feel like we're in the middle of a counterinsurgency operation happening within the Democratic Party. And so I'm curious if there are lessons to be learned from Nicaragua and how Nicaragua has dealt with right-wing counterinsurgency for literally decades.
Right. Yeah, they should use rubber stamps. Apparently, that's how that guy, Byron Barron, that's his name, right?
Yeah.
Byron Barron beat India Walton.
Yeah, it's like Bernie 2020 Redux. I think that there's a lot of really good questions about what is the Democratic Party doing to its left flank.
So. Is that a question? I mean, the question is what kind of violent act is the appropriate action, right?
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking about.
And that's India Walton, who was running for mayor of Buffalo.
Yeah, and she won the primary. She should have won the general, and the right wingers and they pulled out all the stops, and the Democrats sat on their hands.
Yeah.
So it's
and he was a write-in candidate, a Republican.
Originally he tried to run as like the Buffalo Party, but it was totally a sham. I mean, it's just really kind of an unfortunate turn of events. But I think that what's going to happen is like in the next weeks and months, more and more will come out on this story. And I think that progressives who are engaged in sort of electoral strategy should be paying attention to it.
Yeah, we should have someone on from the campaign.
It's a good idea. So
I'm not going to say anything. I will say that I tried to get her on.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen. She was at capacity, and who knows
what the Halper bump would have been?
What the Katie Halper Show bump would have meant. Yeah, it could have been decisive. Very few things beat a rubber stamp, like the stamp of approval of Katie Halper.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So let that be. I think that's has to be part of the post-mortem as well.
Sure. Maybe Ben and Camila are going to get elected to something after this interview.
Probably, yeah. I mean, we can look at the data. I have a pretty good record. It's not 100%. So don't get your hopes up, Ben and Camila. You may not get elected. But you could, and you definitely, your chances will go up. So we have a great show. We have Camila Escalante and Ben Norton coming on. They are joining us live from Nicaragua. And then we're going to be joined by Danny Haiphong, a great journalist, and another great journalist, Wyatt Reed. And they, in addition to talking about very important things, we'll be talking about a little Twitter fight they got into with none other than Keith Olbermann, who someone in the comments called the Alex Jones of the DNC.
I think we just broke news on the Katie Halper Show. Keith Olbermann is still alive?
Yes, he's still alive. Yeah.
Wow.
Resist. No, that actually makes him sound like Alex Jones. That's not fair. I hear some dishes in the background of your house, I think.
It's totally possible. Hold on.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay. Guys, this gives me a chance to connect 1 on 210 with you guys. Okay. Keep the views coming, guys. Okay. Did you lay down the law?
Yes. No.
Okay, good. No. Well, I think should we just start the show? Should we just bring in the guests? I'm really excited. Coming from Nicaragua live, we got Ben Norton of The Gray Zone and Camila Escalante of Kawsachun News. Hi, guys.
Welcome.
Hey, what's up?
Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Hey, guys.
Hey, tell us, please. Thanks for joining us. Where are you? I mean, can't get very specific. Don't endanger yourselves. Don't put yourselves at risk. But what city are you in, and what is happening where you are?
Well, I'm in Managua, and we're still kind of following up on, where things are at. There's still some electoral accompaniment here. Foreign press, of course, they don't really say that online, and our trolls certainly don't believe it. But there are a lot of people here trying to follow up on how things are here. Last night, we attended a celebration with President Daniel Ortega, who invited the international accredited accompaniment and the foreign press to an act to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the passing of founder of the FSLN, Carlos Fonseca, at the Plaza of the Revolution. And so that was, his first big public outing. And there were hundreds of Sandinista youth there and live music. It was what was a big celebration. But we also saw celebrations beginning before the electoral authorities even came out on Sunday night. People were pouring into the streets, coming out of their houses. There was live music and, people riding around on their motorcycles, just waiting to hear the news, the official news that the Sandinistas had been reelected. And of course, without a doubt, they were going to win all along. And that's because everywhere you go, you're always going to find supporters of the Sandinista revolution, of Daniel, and very few who oppose them. And that's something that, you really, unfortunately, have to be here to know, because it seems like that's the news. That's not the news that's coming across on social media and in the major networks. So
I was just going to ask, Camila, was there a lot of talk in the events and in the speech after the victory about what Ortega is looking to do in the next term? Like what's right now in States, the coverage of Nicaragua, it really is through a sort of almost a Cold War lens that totally reduces any sort of politics of of Nicaragua itself. What's the situation on the ground in Nicaragua? What's Ortega trying to do?
Absolutely. Well, his promise and his platform and his campaign has been the public works here. It has been the highways, the first class hospitals across the country that have been built during his administration. It's the public programs. It's all of the infrastructure, and it's the advancement and progress of different groups of people all around the country. And so that's kind of the campaign that he ran on, and that's what people expect. Those who are old enough to remember say that the country was a completely different place, severely underdeveloped, and it has radically changed. And, you really have to come and see Nicaragua to see how clean it is, how safe it is. And you have to also be here in the region to, spend a little bit of time in places like Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador to see what what it looks like on the other side of the border, which is a completely different situation. We have people here who have, spent their fair share of time around the region, around Central America, and they will be headed to Honduras to cover the election. And unfortunately, I heard, or to be international observers of that election, I heard people actually complaining and saying, in the nicest way possible, that they don't actually want to go to Honduras because of all the different issues. People here have been held up. They said that they don't know if it's paramilitaries. They don't know if it's corrupt cops. They don't know if it's, I don't know, all the different groups that they named. But they said that it's very dangerous traveling by car, walking around to Tegucigalpa, and, going to all the different places people need to get to in order to, fulfill their duties as international electoral observers. And we're talking about, representatives of, delegations that go to Honduras for just a week or two. And they're saying that, as nice as it is here, as safe as it is here to be here, and as pleasant as it is walking around freely, you can't do that in Honduras. And it's just a radically different situation. There's so much at stake there for the people of Honduras, who are right now fighting to try to get a government into power like the one the Nicaraguan people have been able to live under for now 14 years of it. So, these are the sorts of things that Danielle has been able to, or the Sandinista government has been able to guarantee. It's, the freedom to live in peace without crime, without transnational crime and cartels controlling the national territory. And, to continue those projects of, trying to safeguard the economy from the incoming sanctions and the threats that are being put forth right now by the United States and its allies, and to, continue to be sustainable in every way possible, including through, its food sovereignty, but also, just trying to progress in terms of social rights and everything like that. And we know that the neighbors around here are pretty backwards themselves, and this is just not being highlighted in the press.
And Ben, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's so crucial to compare apples to apples like Camila is doing. That context is so necessary to understand Central America. We have to compare Nicaragua to its neighbors in what is one of the poorest regions of the world, Central America, and what is also one of the regions that has the highest rates of violence outside of countries at war. Actually, after the 2009 coup in Honduras, which was, of course, backed by the U.S. and specifically the Obama-Biden administration, as it's now known, and the Hillary Clinton State Department. After that 2009 coup in Honduras, the country had the glorious honor of becoming the country with the highest murder rate on earth outside of countries at war, like Syria. So we have to be able to compare Nicaragua to its northern neighbor Honduras and see that here in Nicaragua, not only is it the safest country in Central America, even safer than Costa Rica, which is a much richer country, but also that Nicaragua, and Nicaragua, by the way, has a lower murder rate than the U.S. And by the way, another important detail is that Nicaragua has free education and free healthcare, extremely important details that are never discussed. This is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, according to GDP, which, as we all know, GDP is not a great metric, but given that metric, Nicaragua is the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after Haiti. And despite that, despite the few resources it has, as soon as the Sandinistas came back to power through democratic elections in November 2006, and they came to power in January 2007, immediately President Ortega instituted free universal health care. I have friends whose parents or grandparents had cancer, and I've heard from multiple people that their parents or grandparents got all of their cancer treatment, including chemotherapy, for free. They never paid a single cent. Meanwhile, in the great beacon of democracy in the United States, the most common form of bankruptcy for a household is medical debt, and the most common form of medical debt bankruptcy is cancer treatment. So this is the poorest country outside of Haiti, and they are able to provide that treatment for people. Also, another extremely important detail is free higher education. That's extremely important because from 1990, when the Sandinistas they lost power out of basically what was a U.S. rigged election after a decade of the terrorist Contra war backed by the CIA and the NED, the CIA cut out funding and creating the campaign of this right-wing oligarch, Violeta Chamorro. From 1990 until 2006, when the neoliberals were in power for 3 different administrations, they privatized everything, including the water system and the electrical grid. They literally sold off the railroads. There's no railroads in the country because they were sold to foreign corporations by the neoliberals. The murder rate skyrocketed, violence skyrocketed, prostitution and drug trafficking were huge problems. And people are not stupid. Nicaraguans, even people in their 20s, they remember the neoliberal era. It's not that long ago. It ended in 2007. And poor people in Nicaragua now have the opportunity to actually have class mobility, where if they want to go to college, they can go to college at multiple levels, including a master's degree, totally for free. I mean, you pay a few fees, but it's basically free. So we have to be able to compare Nicaragua to the situation in the neoliberal era and to its neighbors to understand why the Sandinista Front does have consistently around 60 to 65% of the support of the population. Nearly 2/3 of Nicaraguans, consistently, according to polls, support the Sandinistas. It's not 100%, it's not 3/4, but 2/3 is pretty good. And the right-wing opposition is so disunified, it can't unite because there's so many narcissistic personalities and they're so corrupt that there is a little support for the opposition, under 20%. but they can't win at the ballot box, which is why there's so much credit, there's so much energy, and there's so many resources put into trying to discredit the elections in Nicaragua, because they know, just as in Venezuela, the right-wing opposition is so corrupt and so unpopular that they can't win freely and fairly. So their only options are coup attempts, which they tried in 2018, or discrediting the elections, which they're trying now.
So a little bit about the discrediting of the elections, because I think that there's a really hard push of that. Biden referred to it as a pantomime election, which harkens back to Ronald Reagan's response to the 1984 election. Katie's helpfully pantomiming.
I'm doing a pantomime.
In fact,
the
I'm pulling the lever.
Ben, I
2000
would like you to
presidential
pantomime
election.
your answer to this
Yeah,
question.
No, I just want to say one comment. The 2000 election in the presidential election in the U.S. was definitely not a pantomime. Bush won freely and fairly.
Right.
Yeah, seriously, it's like, well, you don't even have to go that far back. I mean, we're in President Manchin's administration right now, and it's like the idea that the United States should be lecturing anybody else about democracy is crazy. But he called it a pantomime election, harkening back to Reagan in '84, referring to the election as a sham election. The OAS is releasing reports.
The Organization of American States.
Yes, is releasing a report basically calling for the election to be annulled. And much has been made. That's I think the number they're saying is 7 candidates for president, or potential candidates for president, have been arrested. Now, I went and I just looked at this list of the potential candidates who've been arrested, and the name Chamorro came up, I think, more than once. And so some of the biographies of these people seemed quite interesting. Could you talk about who makes up the opposition to the Sandinista government, who some of these potential presidential candidates were?
I'll let Ben go and answer that, but let me just give a little bit of a timeline first to these statements that you're talking about. So this whole year, we've heard various statements and literally just threats and, just very coercive statements towards Nicaraguan authorities, and even the directing statements towards the Nicaraguan people, trying to scare them away from voting their choice here at the polls. So the entire year, we heard from the OAS, we heard from the State Department, we heard from Blinken, and of course the far right congressmen that make up, the U.S. legislature. And these people have been, calling, they've been saying that there's no transparency. They have been making statements about, the way in which the elections here have been organized. They have accused the Nicaraguan government of all sorts of things, including, like you said, locking up political opponents and not allowing free press, and sticking to that sort of a script that we've seen over and over again in every country that they don't like, that's governed, by leftist government all across Latin America, but most recently in Venezuela, permanently in Cuba, and obviously in Bolivia. And so, they've had a lot to say, and they've been holding regular Zoom conferences. They've been holding Zoom conferences kind of as breakout meetings as part of the Organization of American States, even attached to the UN General Assembly. They've had these sorts of meetings, and these are by no means neutral, because they're actually inviting the people Ben is about to describe, which is, various people who are part of the right-wing press here in Nicaragua, and also those right-wing politicians and their associates. So, they're using these international bodies, the OAS and the UN, to try to discuss Nicaragua without actually speaking with anyone who forms part of the Nicaraguan government here, but they're actually going directly to bring in the voices of the opposition. And so this is, collusion and meddling, if nothing else, because at these meetings, and a lot of these meetings have been quite, accessible on Zoom. Of course, this is still like in the framework of COVID. So some of them are partially in person, some are online, but it's, they're inviting people like these far right congressmen in the US, these far right political actors here in Nicaragua, and also, the Human Rights Watch, Jose Vivanco, is that his name? And these sorts of people from, the NGO sector and from, this fake human rights industry. And so all of these people are coming together with people who represent Almagro, and they're plotting all year round up until the very, week before the elections. Then, we hear a statement from Canada a few days before the elections. And on the weekend itself, on Saturday and Sunday, we hear almost nothing. It's dead silence. And of course, the whole of the U.S. State is watching. The U.S. government is watching what's taking place here in Nicaragua and saying absolutely nothing. And so obviously we know that we're waiting for them to drop something on Sunday night. Just as the polls are closing here, we get those statements from Biden, which call it, a sham election, which call it a pantomime. Then we have on Monday, Blinken released his statement, as well as Ned Price from the State Department, is disseminating that. And then today, Luis Almagro, tweets out the link to this 17-page sham report in which, they just recycle all of the same tactics that we've seen used against all of their official enemy governments. And, they call for the annulment of these elections. They call for new elections. They want supposed guarantees and all of these conditions that meet, that meet the conditions of the U.S. State Department, not the conditions of, the Nicaraguan people or any sort of electoral authority here or any of the institutions here. But, they're calling it the international community. Again and again, they say international community, but they're really just talking about the United States government. And, they also, just the wording, maybe I can pull up our Kawsachun News tweet, but, so they call on the international community.
Unplug your, I'm sorry, there's a weird noise. Do you think you can just take your headphones out? Because there's all right, thanks.
I would just say, Camila, just to join in with what you're saying, because I think it's really important, especially for younger viewers. This happening in Nicaragua is, I think, not entirely unique. I think if the United States said the same thing to Palestinians or to Iraqis or to Afghanis, It would be similar. But in 1990, the Sandinistas lost the election because the United States was very clear that they had been funding death squads for 10 years. And if the election didn't go their way, the death squads would continue. And so this
and sorry to cut you off, Sam, but there was also an economic blockade, which is another crucial detail that doesn't get talked about. There was an economic blockade of Nicaragua in the 80s, which caused hyperinflation, a shortage of goods, and long lines. The same kind of things we see in Venezuela under the U.S. blockade. It's a dual-pronged strategy. So fund the terror death squads and blockade the country until they vote the government out.
But I just think that there's a way where, especially for people who weren't around for the 80s or were not politically active in the 80s.
Didn't have leftist parents.
This kind of empty rhetoric or this facile rhetoric about we support democracy, we support fair elections, we hope that it turns out the right way. It may sound like, they have the best of intentions. But Blinken and Biden have been around for a very long time, and they know exactly what this election better turn out the right way is going to sound like to the people of Nicaragua who suffered under the Contras for 10 years. And I think, to follow up with Ben, some of these candidates who were arrested, a lot has been made that people were under house arrest, but nothing has been mentioned about the fact that some of the people arrested are ex-Contras.
Yeah, and just to lightly correct you, not to criticize you, Sam, but they were not candidates. This is how they call gray propaganda, right? Nothing to do with the gray zone.
From the gray zone,
Gray propaganda is that's exactly how the corporate media often works. Is that it's not entirely wrong, but there's key elements that are wrong in it, but it's peppered in with things that are true.
Right.
No candidates were arrested. Now, in Spanish, they keep calling them precandidatos, which in the U.S., the best term would be aspiring presidential candidate. We often hear that. But as I also joke, I often point out, but seriously, okay, I'm a pre-candidate for the U.S. president. It doesn't mean anything. All it means is that someone was arrested for violating the laws. I'll talk about in a second. Someone was arrested for plotting a violent coup.
Really going to help you, Ben.
I was going to say, now that you've been on this show,
So
careful
in 2018,
what you wish for.
The other context we need to know, aside from the 80s, which Sam pointed out, which is really important, the terror war in which the CIA armed and trained these fascist death squads. One of the main leaders of the Contras quit from the Chamorro oligarchy. The Chamorro family are the elite, rich dynasty that dominated Nicaragua up until the Somoza dictatorship backed by the U.S. And in the history of Nicaragua, which is 150 years old as a modern nation state, there have been 7 different presidents from the Chamorro family. They're the descendants of the Spanish colonialists who became politicians as the kind of mestizo elite. And anyway, the point is that the Chamorros were deeply involved not only in the Contras in the 1980s, and one of the Contra leaders, one of the Chamorros, published an article in the New York Times admitting that the most effective weapon of the Contras is terrorism, as he said. And he famously wrote that the Contras burn down hospitals and schools faster than the Sandinistas can build them. Well, fast forward, and the Chamorros were central, the same oligarchic family, were central in a 2018 coup attempt, a very violent coup attempt in Nicaragua that outside of the country was presented as the Ortega regime violently cracking down on activists. That's not at all what happened. It was a violent coup attempt in which, yes, unfortunately, there were deaths on both sides. But if you look at the actual numbers, the majority of the people killed, which the estimates vary, but the most likely estimate is over 300 people. Slightly over half of them were either Sandinistas or police from the government. So, and roughly less than a third of the people killed were the so-called protesters, who actually in many cases were armed and very violent, like in Venezuela with the Guarimbas in 2017. So we have to understand not just the 80s, which is important context, but even the most recent history of 2017 with the violent coup attempt in Venezuela with the so-called Guarimbas, the violent barricades, in which they set Black Venezuelans, Afro-Venezuelans on fire because they assumed that they were all Chavistas. There's videos of these largely light-skinned, white, right-wing fascists, frankly, who would have totally been down with Pinochet in the 70s, of them lighting Afro-Venezuelans on fire. There's video and photos of this. And then the next year, in 2018, with the violent coup attempt here in Nicaragua, with the so-called tranques, the only difference between the coup attempt here, the year after in Venezuela, was that in Venezuela they were called Guarimbas. Here they were called tranques, but it was the same playbook. And then finally, let's not forget the coup in 2019 in Bolivia. Each year there was a coup attempt. Unfortunately, in Bolivia, the coup failed because Evo didn't control the military. And I want to point out, one other quick note here.
You mean the coup failed? You said the coup failed.
Sorry, the coup succeeded in Bolivia, but it failed in Venezuela and Nicaragua. Thank you for that correction. It succeeded in Bolivia, and I want to point out really quickly, I'll end on this note really quickly, that in 2019, don't forget that there were a lot of people, unfortunately, even on the left, who pushed this narrative that Evo had become a dictator because he was pursuing his 4th term, which is true. I mean, it was his 4th consecutive term. And which term is this for Ortega? It's his 4th term. Now, people could say that they're supposedly authoritarian, but the reality is that these are very popular leaders in countries that have a history of a lot of instability, and they're trying to maintain stability. And if you think about it in a lot of ways, you can say that term limits are whatever, but the reality is in some ways, term limits can be seen as undemocratic when you have a leader who's extremely popular like Evo Morales was and like Ortega is. And think about liberals talking about Obama. A lot of liberals would love to have Obama.
Hold on one second, Sam. Before we get into this point, though, I want to go back to Camila because she was saying something. Then we can go back to this. Camila, were you look? Oh, and I muted you because you were typing. Sorry, that was the opposite of what I wanted to do. And sorry about the scream. Camila, did you find what you were looking for? Did you want to jump back in?
Yeah, no, I would just say that if anyone hasn't already looked at the 17-page sham report, that they go directly to the conclusions, because the whole thing, start to finish, is all stuff that we've heard before in other instances in other countries for decades, really, in both Democratic and Republican administrations. But the wording is just unbelievable. And I was just looking up the word international in Spanish, trying to find, something I was looking for earlier, can't find it, but it's really just that they, numerous times talk about international commitments, they talk about international obligations, and they talk about the fact that these elections need to be redone in standards that meet, the standards of the international community. And again, they're not talking about, they're really just saying that elections have to be held in which the Sandinistas lose and which President Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo are removed from power. That's the only international community standards that they're talking about. And so by releasing something this long, I mean, they're really just creating different paths on a possible roadmap to how they're going to remove the Sandinistas from power. They talk about, the supposed claims of alleged human rights violations, the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights released some sort of sham report recently. And, they talk about that the political opponents don't have a right to free exercise of their political rights, the issues that they claim with freedom of the press, the sorts of things that we hear in every country, in which if you actually go to that country and turn on the TV, you see that there's just total lies by the right-wing media on the hotel, like on the hotel room TVs in people's houses. The newspapers have blatant lies about the government. And so, these people are actually, unfortunately, still able to operate quite freely, but they're going to, go ahead and use that. So this is long enough and has enough false claims that they can actually pursue different tactics to try to remove the government, saying that they abuse human rights, saying that they don't, hold free and fair and transparent elections. And, now with the Renacer Act being passed just a week before the election, or the week of the election, right? They're going to have different ways to bring in their partners, their friends and allies of the European Union and other countries in order to, maybe make a new sort of Lima group that this time is for Nicaragua, and to try to push more sanctions. So they just have so many different, tactics up their sleeve that are forthcoming. And I think that they've timed this very strategically. And so this is what was responded to today in a press conference, held by these different, North Americans who witnessed the polls. And they said that, what's being broadcast on the exterior in the news is completely contradictory to what they witnessed here at the polls. Here, people were adamant about going early, and a lot of the polling stations, there were a ton of people early in the morning. That's to say that if you had gone at 9 or 10 in the morning, it could have seemed a little emptier. Why? Because everyone was lined up from 5, 6 in the morning to be one of the first to cast their ballot. That's the level of enthusiasm there were. We were seeing pictures and videos from departments all across the country of people lining up at dawn. And so, people were extremely enthusiastic. They said it's their duty as a citizen to vote. But on top of that, a lot of people were just saying that they're voting because they want peace and tranquility, because they, for economic reasons. They, in the Caribbean coast, people interviewed people here that were, for the international electoral accompaniment, said that they spoke to people and they said that they would be voting, or that they had voted for the Sandinistas because of the hurricanes, because this government was able to prevent a catastrophe here. And the neighbors in Honduras and El Salvador were not, and there was grave damage to infrastructure, to people's homes that didn't take place here. So they had many reasons to be enthusiastic for voting. And so this blatant lie about, I don't know what they said, 19% turnout or something like that, when we know, in fact, the CSC announced the turnout to be 65%, is completely outrageous. And we went to polling stations. The international guest here went to polling stations in 10 departments in 2 autonomous regions. And everywhere we went, people reported, totally full, packed polling stations. And you don't see that in every country when you go to observe elections. So just a completely different scenario. There's no people protesting. Why aren't there people protesting? Because the U.S. would have to plan those protests. They'd have to announce them. They would have to, sit in a room together with the different protest organizers. They'd have to send, the budget, all these different things. And because that hasn't taken place yet, they're not being held. We'll know in advance when the protests are being planned, because we'll see all this movement. And that's the sort of movement that the Nicaraguan government has been closely following for a long time. They followed the bank accounts, they followed the money trail, and that's how they were able to find the money laundering that took place here this year. And so, that is really crucial to know that whether or not those people were so-called pre-candidates or aspiring candidates, or if they were just individuals who were looking to find a party or a platform to possibly run on, they just knew they wanted to run and get the money from the United States, that they were money launderers and they are criminals. And this is something they were able to track because the money was being sent to, NGOs, and then it was being taken out and put into people's personal accounts. I mean, this is by far, if these people were to get into power, they would be corrupt in power, because look at what they're doing when they're not even in power. So, these people are fishy to the Nicaraguan people themselves. But, given what we're seeing now in Cuba, with today's the 9th, on the 15th, they're going to be planning, or they have already planned protests for Cuba from Miami, from Washington, and it's completely done through, right-wing, people who are associated with terrorists who actually, have a history of carrying out violent acts in Cuba. Those are completely being planned in U.S. facilities. They're being planned by the embassy. The U.S. embassy in Havana is coordinating with the people on the ground there who are going to be able to kind of structure this thing and get some people out there. I mean, we're going to start seeing this in Nicaragua once again, like we saw in 2018. The difference is that we hopefully won't see those levels of violence, because the people here have vowed to never allow such a thing to happen again. They don't want to see the whole country shut down. They don't want to see those roadblocks. They don't want violence. And they said, whether or not the government stops it, we're going to stop it. We're not going to allow them to put roadblocks down. And that's one more reason why they voted for this government. They don't want to see a disruption of their everyday life. They want peace. And they think that the people who carried this out are terrorists. And they think that the people who ordered these protests, ordered these road blockades and all the violence in 2018 are terrorists for having ordered it. So not only are these people corrupt because they're engaging in money laundering and receiving money from foreign governments, but they're also, ordering, using that money in order to, pay kids to do drugs and carry out acts of violence here.
Camila, can I just ask, because one of the things that you're talking about is sort of the international component of what's happening in Nicaragua, what's happening in Venezuela with the Lima Group, what's happening with Cuba with sort of this terrorist network. And I'm just curious, so much of me just wants to sort of harken back to what happened in the 80s and the 90s. And what you had in, I think it was either 83 or 84, was the creation of the Contadora Group, where other countries in the area that were getting destabilized by the Contra War started to step in and try to push back, however meekly, against the United States and say, this is out of control. You gotta soften this a little bit. It's leaking over into our neighboring countries. It's dangerous. And so I'm just curious, how isolated is Nicaragua at this time? Right? What is it? Its neighbors saying? What's going on in the region?
Well, the immediate neighbors are just some of the worst neighbors you can possibly have. What people tell me here.
I live in Brooklyn. I've had terrible neighbors.
But have you lived next to any Maras?
I'll tell you a story when we're not on the show.
What the Nicaraguan people tell me, and what some of my reporter friends here, because I'm friends with some people in the media here, they've said,
bots,
Camila,
all those bots who got disappeared on social media, but we'll get to that later.
Exactly. So. They say, I know you cover Venezuela a lot. You've been covering it for a long time, and kind of the situation with the border there with Colombia. Costa Rica is our Colombia. I mean, that to me, it just says that it says so much, and that it's horrifying to think that there could be two Colombias. But, it's just the situation is extremely hostile. We have countries willingly surrounding Nicaragua, willing to give up their national territory and, surrender it completely to the U.S. for their, military-based purposes, willing to allow them to use those international waters without any complaint. That's a huge threat to the entire region. Just completely U.S.-friendly, European-friendly, neoliberal governments surrounding them. But I think we're going to have to find out in the coming days and weeks, this question. I wouldn't say Nicaragua is isolated at all, but I would say that it has really horrible neighbors. But going back to this issue with Venezuela and Colombia, well, the Samuel Moncada and some of the Venezuelan officials have been for a long time, as well as Colombians themselves and some actual alternative and independent media in Colombia, denouncing the use of paramilitaries, both in Colombia, also in Venezuela, now in Haiti, and according to Samuel Moncada, in Honduras, which is a neighboring country, and even overseas. So we have people going, U.S. citizens, for example, as we saw in the Operation Gideon. They went to a paramilitary camp to get trained in order to carry out acts of violence and terrorism and a coup attempt in Venezuela in April 2020. So, and then in various other instances. And so there's this whole mercenary industry taking place there, in which all of the companies and all the people who are doing the hiring are in South Florida in every single instance, including the people who carried out the assassination of the former president of Haiti. They're all being planned and financed and purchased and traded from Florida, but they're being sent to Colombia to be trained, and then they're being sent all over the world to carry out terrorism. And a lot of these people are former Colombian military, former Colombian police, a lot of them high ranking and with a lot of experience, and they're getting paid a lot of money to carry out these heinous acts. So this is really scary because it hasn't necessarily, to our knowledge, reached Nicaragua and other countries. It's been concentrated in certain countries that Samuel Moncada has highlighted. So it would be very scary if we begun to see those types of aggressions, because now the United States is being cautious about the use of its military in its own uniform, right? Because, we had this period after Guaido swore himself in 2019, in January of 2019 in Venezuela, where people were saying the U.S. is plotting a U.S. military invasion of Venezuela. And it was a real threat. And it was pretty explicit, I would say. But that didn't, necessarily take place, although, there kind of have been some incursions into Venezuelan waters, and the U.S. has had a heavier presence in the Caribbean waters near Venezuela. But largely what we've seen is just more and more paramilitary presence there on the border, people trying to sneak in, the incursion, off the shores of La Guaira, and different parts of the coast near Colombia. So that was really scary. What that happens here in Nicaragua, I think it would just be a whole nother situation, because this is how they're going to get away with it. They feel that they're not violating any sort of international law, that they can't be held accountable apparently they can't be held accountable in the Security Council for the use of mercenaries, even though the vast majority of the world has denounced the use of mercenaries. A minority of countries have not, and that includes the United States. The United States and its allies, primarily European countries, believe that the use of mercenaries, people who are paid to go and kill people in other countries, is acceptable. This is absolutely unbelievable, and it's just so great. It's unbelievable that Venezuela has been one of the only countries in the Americas that has been consistently raising this issue, this flagrant use of professional killers that are just dispersed all around the world in what is, just exporting of the Colombian conflict and of, the death squads and all of the issues they have there. So I think this is one of the things that we need to be looking out for, is if the sanctions don't work, because Nicaragua has, a sufficient number of people who are adamant about remaining as trade partners. They have a sufficient supply of food because they grow their own food here. They're, begin to produce other things apart from food. And the sanctions they're going to come fast and hard. But if they don't produce the outcome that the U.S. is looking for, what other sorts of tactics and cynical measures are they going to take? And I think that's something that people should be looking into as well.
And This is something that I don't know if people understand the kind of the history. Can you do a mini? Well, Sam, do you have another question directly related to that? Because I have more questions, but it's not a direct follow up to that.
I mean, I'm curious. You're talking about in Venezuela, the mercenaries who got arrested on the beach. Like, whatever happened to them? And then the other question. I mean, there's so much in what you're saying, Camila. Like
yeah, what I'm saying is, well, I just wanted to say, I mean, you know, the reason why they're having to take these extreme measures and resort to terrorism and violence is because they have relied so heavily on, you know, distorting the picture through the use of their media, through these very dominant TV networks and newspapers. But because there's so many alternative outlets, we're right now on a program that, I don't know if you guys call it a podcast or
it's a live stream. A live stream and podcast. It's an experience. It's a lifestyle.
It's a show.
People are getting their news and information from podcasts, from alternative media outlets. The Gray Zone is one of the largest, you know, in this category in the United States, and people are reading and getting their information from it outside of the United States and the English-speaking world as well. People are getting their information from Instagram posts. News outlets that just do these little infographics. So people are actually beginning to hear the truth for once. And it's a major threat. So, you know, the US is getting increasingly desperate. And I think that, you know, so they're going to have to look at different tactics. And so I think that, you know, there's just this desperation is going to manifest in, you know, in one way will be, you know, through violent means. And because the narrative is still, despite all of our, you know, wonderful, truthful reporting, still turned around and pitted against the Sandinista government, they're going to be able to try to justify in some ways, you know, that aggression at the different, you know, those different sorts of aggressions, including, you know,
if I can just say, Katie, I don't know if I told you this, but Ben actually wrote about me in the Gray Zone like this week. And I wanted to ask Ben about it. He wrote about confused progressive observers outside the country. And I was like, oh, me. He's talking about me. And it was in a piece that you wrote about.
Wait, 1 second. Sorry. Were you done, Camila? I just want to make sure. Were you done?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Go for it. Get over to Ben and I need to actually publish a couple of things.
All right. You want to go? We'll let you go. I know you need to go. That's why I was making sure you.
Well, if I can actually steal your seat, Katie, I think this would be a great time. I want to ask Camila a question before she leaves.
Okay.
Because Camila, I know you've spent a lot of time in El Salvador. So can you just really briefly, for people who don't have experience, can you just talk about your experience in El Salvador versus your experience in its neighbor, Nicaragua?
Like currently, or just, I mean, in regards to,
because so few people in the U.S. ever visit Central America. If they go to Latin America, it's like Cancun or whatever. But like, I think it's important people to understand like how different Nicaragua is from its own neighbors. And you have experience in El Salvador as well.
Well, I heard someone saying this about their country. They were talking about an African country where they're from, and they're, you know, now they live in Europe. And they say that whenever they go back there, no matter how many years it's been, it's like everything is the same and nothing changes, nothing develops, not a road is built. People don't have more connectivity. They don't have more electricity. And they say it kind of like laughing, because you have to laugh to not cry. And I think that's a little bit, you know, similar to the situation in El Salvador. Unfortunately, you know, what gains were made during the administration of the FMLN, of the former government, has now, you know, completely is beginning to be reversed under Nayib Bukele. And Nayib Bukele is actually just ordering the militarization of the country. And this is going to be something that is extremely costly for the country. And so instead of, you know, dedicating resources to improving things, you know, that money is going to go towards trying to bring more youth, disenfranchised youth, people who don't feel they have a future, because there's absolutely no economic future for young Salvadorans, are just going to be put into the military to become, you know, killing machines there and to protect a neoliberal model. But yeah, it's kind of just really sad, because I think everybody knows that El Salvador is just a completely gang-ridden, violence-ridden country where you basically, I almost feel like you have to go around in like a motorcade or like a caravan when I'm there, at least. But everybody says this, all sorts of expats or people who live in the US or whatever they want to call themselves, or no, the diaspora, sorry, not expats. I get these words mixed up. But, Salvadorans who live in the US, they always say when they go home to El Salvador, they can't just walk around freely, travel around the country freely because of that extremely heightened situation of violence in which you have to be afraid of being extorted. And right now, the country's experiencing an alarming rate of kidnappings. And I was in El Salvador last week. I came from there and I was with some social movement friends. And my friend there is a leader of a social movement, but also kind of on a regional, continental level as well, of a campesino movement. And, his job there in El Salvador is so important to lead his organization. And because, he has like some successful kind of like farming stuff and he owns property, like someone who has like enough money to live, someone who has, they're not being displaced. They have, their kids probably have some sort of economic opportunity. Maybe they have a higher rate of education than others, but they want to leave. They're thinking about leaving just based on the fact that they're afraid that one day one of the teenage kids will go off to a party and they won't return because people are just getting kidnapped. They go to work and they don't come back because they were kidnapped or disappeared. They go to a party and they say they're leaving with a friend and they don't come back. I mean, this is just happening at an extremely alarming rate. And so, you can't even walk around freely. Here, you can basically just jump on a bus alone and go from one coast to the next. This Bitcoin thing is just a totally ad hoc policy that's being rolled out there. And when is that going to benefit young people in the U.S.? The young people in El Salvador, they're continuing to leave, towards the United States on foot or by plane. But people are looking for more opportunity. It absolutely doesn't exist there. I mean, it's just completely different countries in every sense. I mean, when you're in El Salvador, the people who live in a certain neighborhood will literally tell you, from this street A to street C belongs to this gang. Then on that border, when you cross the bridge from C to F is the other gang. I mean, everybody knows who controls what territory. I mean, if that's not scary, I don't know what is. It's not like that here at all. So it's just two completely different worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to underscore that point before Camila leaves, because it's just so important for people outside of Latin America and especially outside of Central America. It's so easy to try to, and it's so common to try to compare Nicaragua to like rich countries in the imperial core, or even to like Argentina, like these countries that are much richer in Latin America.
Yeah.
But we have to compare Nicaragua to its neighbors, and it's night and day. I've never been to El Salvador, but I've been to Honduras, and I always say this, but like my heart breaks for the Honduran people. I send them all my solidarity. It's not their fault, but Honduras is a nightmare. It's terrifying. I was there for 4 weeks, and like I was afraid of going out in the street. When I was there, the mayor was killed in his car. Like the rate of violence, of kidnappings, of gangs, none of that exists in Nicaragua. Nicaragua is, like I said, Costa Rica is a common place. Costa Rica is a nice country. It's beautiful. The beaches, the politics are bad. But like, there's a lot of people who go to Costa Rica, retirees and tourists. Nicaragua is even safer. But no one ever says that because Nicaragua has a leftist government and Costa Rica is allied with the U.S. So we have to compare Nicaragua to its neighbors. And honestly, I'll just say it openly. What Nicaragua has accomplished in the past 14 years under the Sandinistas since they came back in 2007 is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. You do not feel like you're in Central America. It's much safer than even most countries in Latin America that have GDPs that are significantly higher, that are several times higher. And finally, I just want to add, and we can get, I know you had specific questions about the so-called pre-candidates and all of that, but I just want to point out that this narrative that Nicaragua is like authoritarian and all this is nonsense because, one, strictly from the perspective of actually like the narrative that it's a police state, every time I go back to New York, every time I visit New York, I'm reminded of what a real police state looks like, where there's cops everywhere that are heavily militarized. They're holding assault rifles. They have like all these Humvees everywhere you look, and not just in New York. I mean, we saw that last year with the protests. So in Nicaragua, it's nothing like that. And then finally, the other point is that, okay, Ortega has been in power since 2007. Angela Merkel has been in power since 2005. I mean, it's an easy comparison to make. People say it a lot, but we should interrogate that point. Why is Angela Merkel never called a dictator? Why is she never called authoritarian? Because she's
from the right country, am I right?
Neoliberal, and she's white, and she's not in Latin America, and she's not a revolutionary. Like
we can call her authoritarian.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
I hate Merkel, but from the left.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Oh, you don't hate her from the right, Sam?
No, she's so terrible, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Camila, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks for coming on. Good luck with your piece, and come back on for sure.
Okay. Thanks so much, guys. It was good. It was good talking to you.
Thank you so much.
You too. Bye. Don't go anywhere, guys. We have more show. We got Ben. We have even more guests, which is pretty exciting, right?
Yay!
Yeah, pretty exciting. Yeah. We're gonna bring in some more guests very soon, but before we do that, we do want to ask Ben about his piece. Also, I do have some patrons to thank, but I'll do that I think, but when we bring in the next guests before as a break. But guys, keep those Patreons coming. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. We really appreciate it. And make sure that you subscribe. It's free, guys. You subscribe. No, you don't have to pay. You just subscribe. And to do that, you hit subscribe and then you hit the like. So Ben, can you just tell us briefly about, as briefly as possible, about this piece that you have about someone who was just hailed in The Nation magazine?
Yeah, I know briefly was the operative word there, because I know I have a tendency to go long and to bloviate. Well, I already published this investigation. I'll just get it up on the screen really quickly so people can see. It's called From Nicaraguan Revolutionaries to U.S. Embassy Informants, How Washington Recruited Ex-Sandinistas like Dora Maria Tejes and her MRS party. And I'll explain these photos here in a second. And on the right is Dora Maria Tejes. When she was a guerrilla, I want to point out that she was only 23 years old in this photo when the revolution succeeded. And think about all the stuff you did when you were 23 and how different you are now. The idea that you have the same politics as you when you were 23 is absurd. And she definitely does not have the same politics.
I'm just going to jump in here for a second. What she did was legitimately awesome.
Amazing.
When she was 22.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
Can we just say what she did?
Yeah. So, well, actually, that was when she was 22.
Yeah, I know.
When she was 22, she was involved in one of the key
downhill from there.
No, but it's like I didn't.
I know. I'm just saying.
22.
It was 22, then 30. Yeah. Okay.
It's just. I think for context, we should say what she did when she was 22.
Yeah. Okay. So when she was 22, she was part of an operation as what's called Operación Chanchera. And this was in 1978, the year before the revolution succeeded in July 1979. And she was one of the main commanders of this operation, where they took over the Palacio Nacional, the National Palace, which was at that time where the National Assembly was. It's different now. And it was in session when she did this. And she wasn't just her. She was the third in command. Yeah, there were three commanders. So it's Comandante Cero, Commanders 0, 1st, and 2nd. And she was the second, which is actually the third. And she helped organize this operation. And they took over the National Palace. And they took them hostage. And in return, they demanded the release of all of the Nicaraguan revolutionaries who were imprisoned, most from the Sandinista front. And they demanded millions of dollars. And the Somoza regime, the right-wing puppet dictatorship that was propped up by the U.S., it was forced to agree. And it did release the Nicaraguan revolutionaries who were imprisoned. And it did give them millions of dollars.
And they couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
They had to do it without sleeping because there wasn't enough of them to do shift work. So they did this crazy. I mean, Eden Pastora was 0, right?
He's Zero, yeah, Comandante
Yeah,
Zero, that
yeah.
Commander Zero.
Yeah. So, and he became a Contra and was like mad shady forever after
Well,
that.
his whole story is very complicated and long, but there's a lot of people who speculate that he was never really a real Contra, that he was a
What?
sleeper cell. No, I actually think it's probably true because when he was a Contra, they never really killed anyone or really did any serious operations. And the right-wing opposition had always, he recently died, unfortunately, but the right-wing opposition always accused Eren Pastora of being a secret like spy for Ortega in the opposition, and he eventually came back to the Sandinistas. I think it's actually a lot of people think that he was just a spy for the Sandinistas.
We could do probably a 2-hour show just about Pastora and he was shady as hell.
But we're not doing that.
An
Yeah, we're
interesting
not.
guy,
We're not.
yeah.
So she did this when she was 22.
Yeah.
Legitimately a badass.
Yes,
thing.
we
Incredible.
all recognize that.
Okay.
Which makes
Incredible.
her fall all the more harder.
But so that's why progressive observers outside of the country, such as myself, are totally confused.
Yeah.
What happened?
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to answer that question, but before I just want to go back a few steps and answer another question because I don't want you to think that I was evading the question about the whole pre-candidates. I'll briefly address this whole controversy because she was one of the people who was detained by the government. She was arrested by the government. And I don't want people to think that I'm being cheap and skirting this question because I think people need to understand what happened. So it's true that there were 24 opposition leaders imprisoned, detained by the government in Nicaragua for a variety of charges, but most of them are related to this national security law that was passed by the democratically elected National Assembly. It's voted by the people. This was in November of 2020 of last year. They passed this law that was a response to the coup attempt. And I think in order to understand Nicaraguan politics today, we have to think everyone, even the opposition, everyone thinks of politics in terms of before 2018 and after 2018. 2018 for them is like 9/11 for people in the US. Like it's politics totally shifted in 2018. And I was talking earlier, stressing the point about how Nicaragua is such a peaceful country with an extremely low violence rate. There aren't that many guns in the country. In 2018, there was an extremely violent coup attempt, and the U.S. has its fingerprints all over it. It was very similar to the coup that succeeded in Bolivia in 2019, the year after. And as I said, the estimates are roughly around 300 people killed, over half of them Sandinistas and police, and less than a third opposition, and then some civilians, unfortunately, who were caught in between the battles. There were battles. It was not this one-sided massacre. There were battles where the opposition had assault rifles, and of course the accusations of those assault rifles came from the U.S. And we don't have firm evidence of that, but what we do have firm evidence of is that the U.S. government spent millions of dollars through the National Endowment for Democracy and USAID funding the groups that were behind the coup, pumping in millions of dollars. This is a matter of public record. We have all of these documents. And the people who were arrested were the people who received millions of dollars from the U.S. We have these documents showing the transfers to their different organizations. And then Camila mentioned the money laundering. There was also charges of money laundering against people like Cristiana Chamorro, whose corruption is very well known. She's notorious for it. She's the daughter of the right-wing president, Violeta Barrios de Chamorro, who came to power in 1990. And that family is extremely rich. They use offshore bank accounts. They've been included in the Pandora Papers and all of that. Like, it's not surprising that they've been involved in money laundering, and that the Chamorro Foundation, named after their family, founded after Violeta left power, the Chamorro Foundation was the main pass-through used by U.S. CIA cutouts like the NED and USAID to send millions of dollars to Nicaragua. And then the Chamorro Foundation then dispersed that money to the coup plotters and to other organizations. So the people who were imprisoned for organizing a very violent coup attempt. And what happened is that after the coup failed in late 2018, the government went through an arduous process of negotiations with the opposition, in which the Catholic Church acted as the spokespeople of the opposition. The Catholic Church has played an extremely nefarious role here. Like there were
too bad that some people kind of follow their lead on certain issues.
Yeah, I mean, not just in terms of molesting Nicaraguan children as they do everywhere, but like the Nicaraguan Catholic Church, like the Archbishop here, Silvio Baez, he would go to protests and he would speak at the protests and say that the Sandinistas were satanic and that Catholics have to like overthrow the Sandinistas and all of this stuff. And there's like this ridiculous rumor that the Catholic Church always spreads that the vice president, Rosario Murillo, is like a witch and all this nonsense. And the Catholic Church played a huge role. There's videos of priests like at these violent protests at the tranques. And there's videos of these priests and nuns praying on the ground after people were killed, after Sandinistas were killed. And there's this horrific incident. There's video of a Nicaraguan police officer who was unarmed, like most police at that point. And his name was Gabriel Ruiz Vado. And he's now a very well-known figure in Nicaragua. There's a park named after him, a very beautiful park in the place El Crucero. And he's a well-known name because he was a 20-something young police officer from a very poor neighborhood. And he was kidnapped by the coup plotters. He's very violent, drug-dealing, violent, like very extremist coup plotters. And they kidnapped him, and then they tortured him. And then they dragged him behind the back of their truck on camera. And then they lit his body on fire because, according to the opposition, they don't refer to the police as the police. They call it the Sandinista Guard, La Guardia Sandinista, which is a playoff of La Guardia Somocista, the Somocista Guard. But they're not the Sandinista Guard. They're the national police. And the opposition, like in Masaya and all these areas, they besieged the police barracks, and Ortega made the decision, a very wise decision, to not allow the police to come out of the barracks because he understood what the strategy was. The strategy is the same strategy that the U.S. used in Hong Kong, and this was admitted by a Hong Kong NED-funded Hong Kong insurgency leader. He admitted it in an article he wrote in the New York Times, and the headline is something to the effect of, "The point is to get the police to hit you." He admitted that the strategy is that you want to basically be as violent as you can without going into the realm of civil war, which destabilizes the country and forces the state security forces to crack down on you. And then you use the video because there's constant journalist coverage and video and streaming. There's all this 24/7 footage. So you use the footage of the police responding to your violent insurgency as so-called proof of the police state, of the so-called police crackdown. So that's exactly the strategy that was used in Hong Kong, where these people were lighting people on fire. It's the strategy they used in Venezuela in 2017, and it's the strategy they used in Nicaragua in 2018. And now we're supposed to just forget what happened in 2018, the extreme violence. But the reality is that after the process of negotiations in 2018, the Nicaraguan government made a lot of concessions. And one of the concessions was political amnesty for a lot of the coup plotters. And some of these people who were on the so-called political prisoner list. Now the U.S. government and the European Union talk about how there's so-called 170 political prisoners. I did an article in Nicaragua. I went to the city of Jinotepe, and I interviewed the family members of this woman who was murdered in cold blood by her boyfriend in Jinotepe, Nicaragua. This was in February of last year, before COVID, in the before times. And I went to Jinotepe to interview her family members because she was murdered by her boyfriend when she was pregnant with his child. And who was this guy? This guy was one of the coup plotters, one of the tranquistas who was in the tranques in Jinotepe. There's video and photo of him in the tranques during the coup attempt. And he was imprisoned by the government. But he was on a list of 400 so-called political prisoners by a so-called political prisoner organization funded by the NED, the CIA cutout. And he was released because the Nicaraguan opposition and the Catholic Church and the U.S. and their backers in Brussels, they published on two different websites. And the OAS published the same list. You can find the list of their so-called political prisoners. And on that list is this murderer who killed his pregnant girlfriend with a screwdriver in the back of the head when they got in a fight. And there are also on the list, there were other people who have since gone back to prison for carrying out violent crimes, including being caught with drugs and guns and all of this. So like the point is that the U.S. government, their modus operandi is the Nicaraguan government arrests someone and then the U.S. says they're a political prisoner. And then the Nicaraguan government arrests coup leaders, like 3 different Chamorros. You named there are 3 different Chamorros. Okay, you have Juan Sebastián Chamorro, who is the most right wing of the opposition. He's like the Pinochet muscle, like he's extreme right wing. He's good friends with Marco Rubio. All right, so he's the most extreme. Then you have Carlos Fernando Chamorro, who is from the MRS party of Dora Maria Tejes, which we'll talk about in a second. That's like the fake left opposition. And then you have Cristiana Chamorro. Cristiana Chamorro, who is the sister of Carlos Fernando Chamorro and the cousin of Juan Sebastián Chamorro. She is the daughter of Violeta Chamorro, and she is a total neoliberal, an empty slate, has no political ideology. The only thing is, like, she's done Botox her entire life, so she looks very young and is very telegenic. And she is such a blank slate that the U.S. wanted to make her the Juan Guaido of Nicaragua.
Ben, I see no lines on your forehead.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I don't have to do Botox
inspired.
yet. But so anyway, the last thing I'll say, and then I swear I'll get back to Dora Maria Tejes, so I'll pitch it back to you in a second.
You wrote the piece.
But Cristiana Chamorro, just because I wanted to establish this context, Cristiana Chamorro, the U.S. was planning to recognize her as interim president like Juan Guaido. I have evidence of this because there was a lot of speculation, but there was an event. I wrote an article about this as well at the Gray Zone. There was an event hosted by this DC think tank called the Inter-American Dialogue, a major DC think tank funded by the U.S. government. They played a key role in the 2019 coup in Bolivia, and they have a revolving door with Democratic administrations. After Obama's Latin America foreign policy team left the State Department, most of them went to work at the Inter-American Dialogue. And now that Biden's in office, a lot of them came back to the Biden State Department to run his foreign policy team. And his Central America coordinator, Acuna, he comes from the Inter-American Dialogue. Like that's where he was before, and now he's the special Biden's envoy for Central America overseeing Nicaragua policy. Well, they hosted an event early this year with Cristiana Chamorro and with other right-wing leaders of Central America, of Guatemala, of Costa Rica, of El Salvador, and they praised the so-called Biden plan for Central America and how great it was, all the corporate funding and all of this. And Walmart and Microsoft are going to make jobs for people in Honduras and all this nonsense. And then in that meeting, they kind of jokingly, but not really that jokingly, they said that they were considering recognizing Cristiana Chamorro as interim president. And that comment began with a Guatemalan ex-foreign minister saying that. And then in response to that, the former president of Costa Rica, Laura Chinchilla, said immediately, without a pause, she said, if you did that, Costa Rica would recognize her tomorrow. And then in response to that, the new Biden Central America envoy said that, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, but we're considering all of our possibilities. So it was very clear, and everyone knew that was the U.S. strategy. They were going to not recognize the results of the election in Nicaragua, and they were going to say that the real interim president, like Juan Guaido, is Violeta Chamorro, who is the daughter of Cristiana Chamorro. And they were going to do this whole narrative about how Cristiana Chamorro is like the political reincarnation of her mother, who defeated the Sandinistas.
The daughter's
Violeta.
Violeta is the mother.
Violeta.
You inverted it. Yeah.
Like Cristiana was the
Had
daughter
an
of
inverted
Violeta.
violet. It's a great gym move. Yeah.
So that's we have to understand all of that context to understand the arrests of the different coup leaders in the past year, because what the Nicaraguan government was doing was, one, cracking down on all the coup plotters, most of whom were slapped on the wrist and not arrested as part of the 2018 dialogue negotiations and the political amnesty that was issued. And then also it was the Nicaraguan government not only taking action against coup plotters who anywhere in the world, if you take millions of dollars from a foreign government to organize a coup, you'd be thrown in prison. But not only that, it was also the Nicaraguan government detaining all of the people that the U.S. was considering as their potential Juan Guaido of Nicaragua. So we have to understand all of this in the context of the regional. I mean, they did.
The shorthand is potential loser, because last I heard, Guaido has like totally failed in Venezuela.
Yeah, well, Guaido, according to the main polling firm, which is called Data Analysis in Venezuela, the most legitimate polling firm, in February of 2019, when Guaido was recognized as so-called interim president in a plot that was totally organized by the Biden administration. I mean, sorry, the Trump administration. It was not spontaneous, obviously. It was planned beforehand. Well, when they did that, they chose him because he was young and charismatic and looked like Obama, which, by the way, is something that infuriated Trump. We have these internal leaks that Trump was mad that they wanted to find someone who looked like Obama, and Guaido even tried to talk like Obama for a while at the beginning, like the very like. Excuse me, listen, please. So
he was doing the white T-shirts where he would roll up the sleeve, or the white button-down shirts where he would roll up the sleeves. It was like watching a cover band.
School. He just looked like / a Catholic school boy.
Well, and Guaido, the point is, this firm Data Analysis found that in February, they did this poll in January, right before he self-declared, because in January of 2019, that's when he was elected president of the opposition-controlled National Assembly, because in 2016, there were free and fair National Assembly elections in Venezuela, and the opposition, the right-wing opposition, won a majority, despite the fact that we're told that Venezuela is a dictatorship. And in the majority, every year they re-elect their new National Assembly president. So at the beginning of 2019, in January, he was elected National Assembly president. So Data Analysis did a poll at the end. It was in the 20s, like 23rd, 25th of January. They published this poll and found that only 13% of Venezuelans had ever heard of Juan Guaido. That was 3 weeks before he declared himself interim president. And that was exactly the strategy that the U.S. was going to use for Cristiana Chamorro. Most Nicaraguans didn't know who she was, but that's good because it meant she had a blank slate. And then because she was imprisoned for money laundering this is a matter of public knowledge. We have receipts showing them the millions of dollars going from the U.S. government into the Chamorro Foundation. And then that money, the Chamorro Foundation shut down voluntarily. They voluntarily suspended operations in response to the foreign agents law passed by the Nicaraguan National Assembly. So in return, the Chamorro Foundation voluntarily shut down, and then all of that money went into her personal bank account, which is money laundering. You can't take millions of dollars from the U.S. government that goes to a foundation and then put that money in your private bank account when you shut down your foundation. So she was arrested for money laundering. So now she can't be recognized as interim president because the U.S. strategy was they knew, according to polls for many months, that the Sandinistas have consistently had around over 60 to 65% support at the polls, which is consistent with the voter turnout, with the recent polls of 75% of the vote with 66% voter turnout or 65% voter turnouts, according to the most recent election. So the U.S. knew that the opposition couldn't win. So their strategy was that they were going to say that the Sandinistas did not win. It was a fraudulent election and that they're not going to recognize it. And in the meantime, they're going to recognize Cristiana Chamorro as interim president until they can have a new election. That was the strategy. But now the Nicaraguan government nipped it in the bud, which is why it's being so aggressively criticized, because they would not allow Juan Guaido #2 to happen before it did.
So I'm just curious, Ben, I don't know if it was you or Camila earlier in the conversation who alluded to this, but there's sort of the Venezuela strategy happening in Nicaragua. But Venezuela's opposition has been a mess for, all of Maduro's time. Leopoldo Lopez, Guaido, it's been this totally fractured group. It's like they're watching the Keystone Cops of oppositions. And I'm just curious, what is your sense in Nicaragua of the opposition groups? The second place candidate, I think, polled around 15% or something. Is the Nicaraguan opposition similarly sort of like 20 cooks and no in the kitchen and not in
too many chamorros?
Yeah, too many chamorros.
Great question, and this will also let me get back to your question about Dormirietes, because I don't want it.
We may have to do another show on that.
I'll keep it short. I'll keep it short. I don't want people to think that I want people to understand the situation so they can respond.
Yeah,
to
I
the
think.
propaganda.
Are you letting the comments get under your skin or something? Stop looking at the comments. I can tell you're.
No, it's not.
No, I'm not looking at the comments. Just because there are certain narratives that have some power, and I understand that. I understand they have power.
Like,
the
let's
idea,
just say Ortega's bad on abortion. I just want to put that out there.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry. We
But
should
he's
not be
bad on a few
intervening
things.
there. He fucking
most
sucks
of the
on
Latin
that.
American left.
Yeah, I
most
know.
of the
but
Latin
he
American left is bad in abortion.
Of course, yeah.
In
It's not like
Venezuela,
he's not a
at the-
trailblazer on that. But for God's sakes, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the peak
not
of,
you, man.
At the
Ortega.
peak of Chavez's popularity, abortion was never even on the table to discuss. And in fact, really quickly, just while we're on this, I'm going to share my screen and show you something in terms of abortion, because I'm going to come back to this. But so this is about this party called the MRS Party, which is the party co-founded by Dora Maria Tejes, and I'll talk about her in a second. But so
What does it stand for? The what renovation?
The
It sounds like
movement-
an interior decorating company.
it
Renovation.
stands for the movement for the renovation of Sandinismo. Can you show my screen, please?
Yeah.
And
Oh my!
And-
Thank you, Priyankar Sarkar. Very generous. Yeah.
thanks, Priyankar. So what happened is that and the MRS is like the fake left opposition. I'll talk about them in a second. And I have this long investigation, but it talks about how the MRS party, co-founded by Dora Maria Tejes and the others, that they have been U.S. embassy informants since at least 2006. And there's all the WikiLeaks documents showing it. But there's an interesting WikiLeaks document. This is a State Department document here, in which they acknowledge that the MRS, which is basically the MRS emerged as a right-wing split out of the Sandinistas in the 1990s. I'll talk about that in a second. They wanted to drop socialism and anti-imperialism from the platform, and they wanted to be like a European-style.
Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. 1 second. I have to cut you off for 1 second. Someone in the comments, I know I just said don't respond to them. Are you fucking kidding me? You said I'm nitpicking, but never when it comes to Bernie, because I brought up a reactionary abortion policy? Sorry, I shouldn't respond to that, but I just want to be. I believe in re-education camps, and you should be sent to one of them. Okay, that's so fucking stupid, and way to perpetuate the bro narrative of social issues not mattering. Like, get the fuck out of here. Sorry, that just drives me fucking crazy. Yes, I'm soft on Bernie, but this is not nitpicking. Are you like a parody? Are you a right winger in this stream, pretending to be?
I want to get this out of the way really quickly on abortion. So the MRS party,
but that's what
is like.
That's what we try to do with abortion, actually.
They formed in the 1990s as a right-wing split out of the Sandinistas and wanted to drop socialism and anti-imperialism and become like the French Socialist Party, which is like a centrist party that is liberal and supports abortion and LGBT rights. And so the MRS openly campaigned supporting abortion in 2006 with their candidate, Harkin, and he only got 6% of the vote in that election, by the way. And the U.S. Embassy, which supported the MRS, admits internally in this State Department cable, they say here that the candidate Harkin from the MRS, who only got 6% of the vote, it acknowledged that, quote, Harkin expressed his support for legalizing elective abortions, a procedure opposed by a large majority of Nicaraguans. This is the U.S. Embassy admitting it internally. So, like,
yeah, but Ben, abortion's legal and on demand in Cuba.
Yeah, well, the thing about Cuba is they had if you want to go totally Cuba style, I'm down. Socialist revolution, get rid of presidential elections, one-party state. Okay, fine. Like,
I'm not. Listen, I just think that we need to be clear about this. The Sandinistas, there was a long period where they were in power in the 80s, where they were doing an ideological push within the country. Their literacy rates, they knocked illiteracy from like 50% down to like 15%. They got international awards for it. They got international recognition for it. On my bookcase, I have pamphlets and political material from the 80s that the Sandinistas pushed all kinds of advanced political ideas in Nicaragua, and that it was happening in revolutionary countries all over the place. It is disappointing that Ortega was weak on that in the 80s under this excuse that they had to repopulate the country after the war. And then when he returned in, he made some strange alliances with the right, and especially on abortion. And I think that we can both be stand strong against U.S. imperialism, and we can reject U.S. lecturing to Nicaragua about democracy, and also say that, like, Ortega, there can be criticism of Ortega.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree, but on the issue of abortion, though, I think it's something so cultural that, like, I have friends who are, young in their 20s, early 30s, who are very revolutionary. They're from the Sandinista youth, and they represent like the left wing of the Sandinista party. There's different wings. There are wings that are more moderate, and then there are especially young people. Some of them call themselves communists and call themselves Marxist-Leninists. The Sandinistas are a hybrid. They're definitely not a Marxist-Leninist party. They've always been a hybrid, and they have different wings in them. And I know, and some of those people still oppose abortion. Like, the reality is that it's a cultural thing. And this another thing that's very important to understand about Nicaragua is that from the very beginning, the Sandinista revolution, which is not well known, has always been extremely Christian. And that's honestly something that I'm not a huge fan of, but it's not my point to judge. I'm not Nicaraguan, but
Yeah,
even
we
back
don't
in
have
the
to.
80s,
We don't have to.
But there's
like,
but let's be clear,
criticizing
Ben.
with
There are
any support of
Christian
U.S. intervention.
there are Christians in Latin America who are pro-choice, and there are communists who are certainly there's a lot of communists who are pro-choice. And Ortega made some choices that, you know, I'm in Brooklyn. I don't have the right to make certain judgments, but I can look at it a little.
Luckily, you're
askance.
pro-choice, so he can make the choice
but-
even if you disagree with it.
a few quick points in response to that. Again, I don't want to dwell on this point too much, but for people to understand that in Cuba, they had a Marxist-Leninist style revolution. Well, after the revolution, it wasn't Marxist-Leninist at first, but later in 1961, Fidel declares it socialist, and he's Marxist-Leninist, and they have a one-party state, and they don't worry about presidential elections, and the party can do whatever it wants. In Nicaragua, what happened is in 2006, well, throughout the time when the Sandinistas were in the opposition, the party reformulated. It changed itself a little bit. It did slightly moderate its politics a little bit, although it's becoming more revolutionary over the past few years. It's significantly moved to the left in the past few years, especially after the coup attempt failed. But anyway, the point is that one of the things that they did, and their economic policy, like it's certainly very much a developmental kind of social democratic model. But on cultural politics, it's true that they did side with this kind of very kind of like going along with the majority based on polls. And the majority polls do show that a majority of Nicaraguans do not support abortion. And you could say that they've been in power long enough that they could take more leadership. But the reality is that the Sandinistas emphasized very heavily, and they still do today, very heavily a Christian identity, but a very progressive, revolutionary Christian identity. And Ortega often gives speeches about how Jesus was a socialist, Jesus was a revolutionary. Hugo Chavez did the same thing. And unfortunately, the abortion laws in Venezuela are just as bad. But the reality is that we have to understand the cultural context. And if you look at the slogan of the government, on all of the government documents in Nicaragua, there's 3 words. It says Nicaragua Cristiana, the first one, Christian. Socialista is the second one, socialist. And Solidaria, like in solidarity, is the third one. That's on all of you go get a PCR test. Like whenever I go to the US or another country, I have to get a PCR test here in Nicaragua, and they're all state-owned PCR stations through the socialized health system. And you get your PCR test back, and it has the Nicaraguan like stamp on there, and at the bottom it says Nicaragua Cristiana Socialista Solidaria, like on all of the government
the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, so like the point is that the Christian identity, even back in the 80s, people probably know that there were numerous priests who were part of the junta of national reconstruction, who were key leaders of the Sandinista revolution. So the point is that basically the Sandinista revolution has always been the only example, in my view, of liberation theology taking state power, and especially since they came back in 2007, even more than in the 80s, they've really used Christian identity as a way to win popular support, and it's worked for them. But unfortunately, yes, one of the things that they've had to compromise on is definitely abortion. But the final thing I'll say on this is that under the Sandinista government, a woman has never been arrested for carrying out an abortion. It is unfortunate.
That's a sad bar, but it is a bar.
Well,
no, I'm serious.
But we're in Latin America. But I know.
There's people who've been
in
Honduras and El Salvador. There are
Yeah.
women serving life sentences. Under the Sandinistas, a woman has never gone to prison based on an underground abortion. It's unfortunate that they have to do them underground.
Yes, right.
But they don't actually implement the law. But you just can't get an elective abortion at a hospital, which is unfortunate.
It's a point well taken.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll see positive movement on that.
Yeah. Well, this was great.
And sorry, well, I know I keep ranting here, but one other point, because in the U.S., in the feminist movement, there's such a fixation on abortion as if that's the most important issue for women. But another important point is that Nicaragua was recognized of all organizations by the World Economic Forum for having the fifth highest level of gender equality in the entire world.
Wow.
And why is that? Because the other thing about another criticism often made of Nicaragua and the Sandinistas is that the vice president is Rosario Murillo, who is the wife of Ortega. And people criticize that without understanding that that basically what it is a kind of power sharing agreement. And what it reflects is that the Sandinistas, they implemented legislation that say that all government offices have to be 50-50 men and women. And they act on that. All not just government, like not just the ministry, like the cabinet has to be half and half men and women, but also like in the most recent elections on November 7th, they had all their deputies as well, not just the president. And all of the deputies in the National Assembly, there's 90 different candidates. It had to be, all of the parties had to have their candidates half men and half women.
Do they have to be married?
No. But they have to be half men and half women. And they have gender parity. And in like the Sandinista youth, there's a co-chair system. So in the Sandinista youth, which is the lifeblood of the Sandinista front, it's extremely well organized. Honestly, much better than any other part of Latin America. The Chavista youth they exist, but they're not. In Nicaragua, the Sandinista youth is extremely powerful. And so, for instance, there's different movements.
Just wait, I'm going to interrupt, Ben. I'm sorry. Is that a holdover? Because the revolution itself, like in 79, 80, was a very young revolution. Is that a holdover culturally from back then?
Well, yes and no. I mean, no in the sense that it's an intentional policy that when the Sandinistas came back, in the 80s, the Sandinista youth were not really that important because it was a very militant, like in terms of violence time. It's now, since they came back, they always emphasized sponsoring and really cultivating the Sandinista youth because, one, it's a way that they get their new government officials. It really is a meritocracy. If you want to be in the government, what you do is you join the Sandinista youth as a young activist, and then you work your way up into different. So there's different what they call movements. There's the sports movement. There's the environmental movement. There's the women's rights or the feminist. Like they don't call it feminist because that's a complex term. They call it like the women's movement. There's a cultural movement. Anyway, the point is, if you're a young activist and you want to get involved, you get involved in one of the movements they call. And each movement has two leaders. One is it has to be a man and one has to be a woman. There's co-chairs. They're called the chairs. So everything, it has to be gender parity. And then they emphasize the youth because if you want to get in the government, you become a Sandinista youth militant and activist, and you work your way up, and then you get a job in the government. So unlike a lot of governments around the world where people just pick, like, even if you're a revolutionary government, you come to power and you need a bunch of technocrats because you have to run the government. The Sandinista youth acts as the organization that cultivates new leaders. So most of the people in the cabinet and the mayors and the diputados, the deputies, they're actually not from well-known families. A lot of them are from working class and very poor families, but they were Sandinista youth activists who became well-known in the Sandinista youth movements, and then they became politicians, including like the mayor of Managua, including numerous ministers. So anyway, the point is, I mentioned that because to understand that women's representation is not something taken lightly. It's extremely important at every single level of the government. And so, yes, the abortion laws are very bad, but the reality is that abortion is not the only part of feminism.
I think we make that clear on the show a lot.
And in Latin America, Nicaragua has the highest gender equity, at least according to government officials, which is not the best, but still, like, the point is that, that Rosario Murillo, as like vice president, she actually kind of echoes like the kind of co-presidency system or like the co-chair system they have. And she has very highly emphasized women being part of the Sandinista revolution. And yes, that you can make criticisms about the fact that she's his wife, but the thing is, she does deserve credit for actually, like, a lot of young women in the Sandinista youth I've interviewed and talked to, and they see her as like an inspiring figure because she's such a powerful figure in the government and has implemented all of these policies. So yes, you can criticize them for being husband and wife, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of incredible what they've done as like this, the perfect like dynamic duo. Like, talk about power couple. Like they brought back the Sandinista revolution despite like bourgeois democracy and all of having to make all of these alliances and all these things. What they've accomplished is pretty incredible, and there's something to admire about that.
What a lot of people don't know is the Nicaragua's gender parity laws actually were inspired by Katie and her co-hosts.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. Well, this has been really great, Ben. Thank you. We're going to bring in another guest, but come back on and talk about your article.
Yeah,
but
I'd love
actually,
to.
of course, now when I'm ready, 1 second, let me just see.
I was actually I was just, if I can share my screen for the final 30 seconds. I was just notified of this. Someone sent this to me. So you know how like on the left, it's often like this is good. It's like it's very acceptable to support Lula da Silva, and I support him 100%. Long live Lula, he's amazing. But what's often not done is people will say they love Lula, but they won't look at what Lula and his party say. Here is the Workers' Party, the PT. This is Lula da Silva's party in Brazil. They just released a statement praising the elections in Nicaragua. It says the Workers' Party like sends its greetings to, it applauds the Nicaraguan elections that took place on Sunday, November 7th. And it says here, the Workers' Party of Brazil, led by Lula da Silva, it says it like applauds the Nicaraguan elections that took place on November 7th. And what was a great manifestation, and what was a great popular and democratic demonstration of that country. So this is the Workers' Party, Lula da Silva, praising the elections as a great popular and democratic manifestation of Nicaraguan will. So if you're going to praise Lula da Silva, if you're going to praise Evo Morales, you should actually listen to what they say about other countries in Latin America, because the last thing I say, I swear this is the last thing and I'm going to shut up, is that there's been this unfortunate tendency I've seen emerging outside of Latin America that tries to say that there are certain good left-wing leaders, like in Bolivia and Argentina and Lula, but there are certain bad left-wing leaders like Maduro and Ortega and Diaz-Canel in Cuba. But if you actually listen to what Diaz-Canel or what Evo Morales says and what Lula da Silva says, they strongly stand in solidarity with Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua. And the left in the U.S. should obviously as well.
Yeah, take that, you Lula fans who dislike these other governments. They are out there, as you said. Ben, thank you so much. Come back on. We'll do another thing on that great article that you wrote.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me blabber over the time that I probably would have been apportioned otherwise.
No, it's great. Bye. All right, we're going to bring on to the show.
Can we make jokes first?
Yeah, sure. But I think we may have to make jokes with, I feel bad.
Okay. Bring Danny on. Bring Danny on.
With Danny, hopefully. Danny's kinder than we are, though. He may not be a joke around with us. But we're going to bring on to the show Danny Haiphong, journalist, Spirit of Ho on Twitter from the Black Agenda Report, also has his own new show. Welcome, Danny. He's muted himself. That's how polite he is. Hold on, Danny. Let me unmute. Hi, Danny.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh,
I can joke.
I know you can joke. Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
I have a mean streak. I do.
You do? Wow.
I know. I've seen it.
Once Danny got mad at me for not responding to him quickly. And shocking. But you apologized without my following up, without my telling you to, which is very nice.
You got to be self-aware.
Yeah, you got to.
Not a lot of self-aware leftists out there.
No, it's true. Yeah. If you have the number of that other person, let me know.
Wyatt, let me. Oh, why didn't I think of that? I actually do have him on WhatsApp. Hold on 1 second.
Right, we're trying to get it, but Danny this is a very exciting moment, guys. If you're watching, this is the Katie Halper Show. Make sure you rate and review us on the podcast. Make sure that you also become Patreon supporters. Make sure you subscribe by hitting subscribe and then the bell. Also want to thank some of my recent Patreons.
You got to lean back so we can hear them.
I know. 1 second. Yeah. I want to thank my recent new Patreons. Welcome them to the family. Look at that. We're thanking you guys. Kate C, Warren S, Laura H, Tyler T, IBK, Carol, Tamar S, Solomon, Sarah L, Lisa D, Flavio P, Harvey J G, Tim H, David K, Jonathan MB, Adam K.
Welcome and thank you.
Welcome and thank you. Yes, welcome. Thank you so much. Really wonderful. Wonderful to see all of you guys.
Could not do it without you.
Could not do this without you. Yeah. Michael, Tom, Tommy, Susan, Colm, Rebecca, Nathan, Rach, Brett, Choleric Serpent of the Left Path, one of the best supports. Nathan Lee, Adil S, Sam H. Yeah, all of you guys help make this show possible. And Danny, you do great work. Tell us about your new show. And then we're going to talk also about you got into some Twitter trouble, which isn't just, isn't just online drama. It's actually significant. We'll explain why in a second. It kind of parallels the social media censorship and media censorship that's happening. So tell us about your new show, please.
Yeah. Well, to begin, first, thank you all for having me. Thanks, Katie, for doing this. I really appreciate it. Love all the work that you're doing out here on the left. And I texted you his number. So
yes.
Wyatt, if you're out there, please come.
Yeah, come on,
Wyatt. Calling Wyatt. So yeah, essentially, I co-host a podcast on YouTube called The Left Lens with Margaret Kimberly, and I've launched my own program called the Internationalist Transmission just a couple weeks ago. And first guest was a friend of the show, Esha Krishnaswamy, talking about Lenin, because the point of the program is to discuss internationalism, something that is, as Ben was sort of alluding to, can be elusive to a lot of our friends on the left, in the sense that either there's selectivity in what nations or peoples to support from U.S. aggression, or there is just outright support for U.S. aggression against countries that the United States targets. And so the whole basis for the program is to discuss with those in the movement and journalism, those on the ground, what internationalism really means from the various perspectives. So I had Low-Key, Iraqi British hip hop artist. And yesterday I had, which is related to the whole social media censorship issue, I had a panel, Richard Medhurst, friend of the show, Lee Camp, friend of your show, and Li Jingjing of CGTN, China Global Television Network, to talk about
friend of the show.
Yeah, exactly. Also a friend of the show, a friend of the progressive left in the United States. And they were, I had them on to talk about what it's been like from their experience, because I also have contributed to all of the state affiliate, most of them. RT I've contributed to CGTN, I've contributed to Press TV, the Iranian outlet, and I wanted to get their understanding of what it's been like to be the target of that censorship, because now, as your viewers may know, these outlets are labeled state-affiliated media. The BBC, Radio Free Asia, various US and UK government-funded outlets are not labeled this. But you have Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all giving people and outlets these labels and then censoring them in the algorithm, or outright shadow banning them, which Li Jingjing talked about. She was the only one on the panel who has been effectively shadow banned on Twitter because of her employer is CGTN. And so, it was a really great panel. We talked about the reasons why this is happening, right? This Cold War hysteria, this new Cold War, Russia and China, the fact that the United States as an imperialist system is losing its grip over the narrative. I mean, Ben was talking about that, Camila, around Nicaragua, but we could really go global to include a whole host of changes and developments in the world, China's rise, Russia's reemergence as a global power, as well as the fact that the United States and its Western allies, they don't really have an ability to offer much to the world right now, right? We're seeing that with the fact that the United States can't even pass a spending bill that will help even just a modicum of people through a crisis that is now 18, 20 plus months and counting. And we're going to talk about this later, but at COP26, we saw how Joe Biden was all full of bluster about how the United States was leading the world out of climate change. And then, recently has demanded that the world, including the United States, pump more oil so that the U.S. economy can get out of its so-called inflation crisis. right? So there's a lot of double talk and there's a lot of censorship that is going on with this propaganda, right? Because it really is about silencing those voices who are critical. And a lot of us who are critical of the US foreign policy establishment don't have really anywhere else to go but a CGTN, but an RT, but a Press TV, because very few outlets in the United States, both corporate and so-called independent, they don't really want to hear it. So the point of the show is to really elevate those voices and, and to continue to develop an orientation and perspective of peace and anti-imperialism within the independent media space and the movement at large.
Well, we have another one of those guests joining us right now is Wyatt Reed. Sorry, of many of those outlets, Press TV, Sputnik, journalists joining us from. Are you in Nicaragua right now still?
I am, yes.
Okay, awesome.
And it's
yes.
funny, you discovered my secret hidden high school nickname.
Oh yeah, was it really? Wyatt Reed, was it really?
It's more of an.
Oh, and it's a joke, yeah.
Oh no, you cut out.
I just need to show, not tell. Sorry about that. I was just trying to emulate the censorship that you face. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. And you guys, actually, we're going to get into more the less entertaining part soon. That's like the opposite of a good way to describe it. This seems a little petty, but it's not. It's not just because Keith Olbermann has blocked me, though he has. Wow. I do want to talk about why this matters. Tell us, you got called a whore by Keith Olbermann, correct, Wyatt?
I did. Not just any whore, but the whore of a dictator. Apparently.
Yeah, the whore of a dictator. So for a dictator, right? So it's sex work shaming and xenophobic from Keith Resist Olbermann, and that's not just. I'm just going to give up justifying why I think that's important. We're going to get to that because it also led to a shutdown of Danny's account for a bit. But let me just open this up. Let's get to what happened. This was he got a little triggered by a tweet that you did, correct? A very funny video that you made.
No, so it wasn't the video. It was the tweet that I put out was about the New York Times blatant lies, the obvious propaganda, disinformation that they put out yesterday or a couple days ago about Nicaragua.
Got it. Okay, let me try to get that original tweet that you put out. Was it? If the Nicaraguan government was actually that one?
It was not that one.
Oh, that's another great tweet. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can you send me a link to that one? But while you do that, I want to show this. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sending now. Okay. The tweet has to do with the it's in the fantasy Nicaragua invented by the New York Times. There are no billboards or campaign posters featuring anyone else other than Daniel Ortega. And I said, meanwhile, in real life, there are literally hundreds of opposition banners hanging throughout Managua. And I included a sampling of photos that I took because I expected something like this to happen. I expected them.
Okay, 1 second. Let me actually get to that. Where is that? Did you text it to me or DM it to me or?
Oh yeah. Here, it's coming now. Send me it. Yeah. Right. You should have that now.
All right, great.
And yeah, I'll let you take it over.
Okay. Let's see. All right, we got
Wyatt and Danny, I'm going to just jump in here for a second.
Yeah.
My real takeaway on the story is that Keith Olbermann is still alive.
You're not the first person that said that to me, actually. Yeah.
It's like, wow, that's a blast.
He's alive and bothered, yeah.
He's alive. 4 o'clock in the morning, furiously tweeting.
Oh, he's like a Niratan then.
Yeah.
He was very active during the whole Russiagate Trump period, but
yeah, he was. Yeah, he kept talking about the walls closing in.
Russia, literally yeah. Russia. Yeah.
So here we got it. Wyatt Reed tweets in the fantasy Nicaragua in the fantasy Nicaragua invented by the New York Times, there are no billboards or campaign posters featuring anyone else other than Daniel Ortega. And then, as you described, you have you quote them, you quote the New York Times piece, and then which says that. Then you show Gobierno del Cambio for Pedro Terminio Mendoza, who's another candidate. So a big banner for him, another banner for another politician, another banner for two politicians.
And those are one party. There's ALN parties, there's other banners up all throughout Nicaragua, all throughout Managua that I didn't even take photos of. But, that was just, I took those in like 20, 30 minutes.
Right. Yeah. You didn't have all day. And so then what happens? Let's set up what happens. So then Keith gets a little mad. It's hard for me. It's a little bit of it's a tricky act because he blocked me, but I'm trying to look. You did tweet about his response. Hold on, let me just go to this.
I can send that along to you as well if that would help.
Let's see. I was wrong. I have to correct the record because I thought it was to a different tweet. Yeah. Can you do that? Thanks.
I'm on my way. So take over.
All right.
Okay. I am sending it to you. Here you go. You got it.
All right. You don't have headphones, do you? Since we take down the fourth wall on the show.
Oh yeah, I do. Should I plug?
Could you put? Yes, please.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks. No, that's okay. All right. Don't worry, guys. This is about Danny and Wyatt. It would be very awkward to just bring on, to just make this about one person. All right, 1 second. While having someone else on. All right. Okay. Can you say, oh, hello?
There he is. He's back.
You may have to change the settings. If you go to the cam mic thing at the bottom of the page, cam mic, just make sure that your input is, or your output is your headphones. I think we hear you, right? I don't even know. Guys, this is a reminder. Donate to the Katie Helper Show Patreon. Help us with all these things. We did a sound check. We did, but then we had a spontaneous addition.
Here we go.
Okay, great. Yeah.
All right, now I can hear you guys.
Oh yes, that sounds
Okay.
better, right? All right,
right.
awesome, great. Okay, so now we're gonna look at what happened with what say ye, Keith. Okay. And you'll see, but won't be able to see it because we are because I'm blocked by Keith. I don't remember why.
You can just log out.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
want
you're
me
right.
to? I could maybe share it.
Oh yeah, you
Would
could.
that
He didn't
help?
block you yet. Wow. That's kind of that's all right. Yeah, sure. You want to share?
I have it. Yeah, I have
Alright,
it.
great.
I have it up. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, he didn't block me yet, which makes me think maybe he's coming back for more. Fingers crossed.
Ooh.
Is
Well,
it
I'll
up?
tell you. Let's see. Oh, great. Perfect. Okay. Oh, yeah. So what's it like to be a whore for a dictator is what is how Keith Olbermann, statesman, polite guy that he is, responded. And then Wyatt responds to that with what's it like to be ratioed by an actual journalist? Ouch. And then Wyatt wasn't the only one who responded to that.
Right.
Someone named Danny Haiphong also responded to that with the following. Sorry, I had them all open before. Danny, do you have your response to him?
Oh, I would have to go on.
Don't worry about it.
My email.
What did you say? You said, what's it like to be...
What is it like to get that ratio because you're a whore for the American oligarchy?
Yeah. So what's it like to get to that ratio because you're a whore of the American oligarchy? And then, hold on, let me actually open this. Damn it, I had it up.
You got
Sorry.
sent to Twitter jail?
Yeah, and then like within minutes too, because
Okay, here we
I think I like left my phone for 5 minutes just to like get up and do something else. I come back to it, and I'm told that I am in Twitter jail, that I had violated the terms and agreements of being respectful to race, gender, creed, all the check
The
The
boxes.
Olbermanns, people
says-
of Olbermann
Yeah.
descent or something.
It says your account was locked specifically for violating Twitter's rules against hateful conduct.
Hateful
Yes,
conduct, yeah.
exactly.
You may not
So,
promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. He may have a serious disease, guys. And then they show
Russiagate
you
is a serious
he was
disease.
Russia. Yeah, he does have Russiagate-itis. He does have brainworms. He has a bad case of brainworms. And then it shows what's it like to get that ratio because you whore for the American oligarchy. That's what you said. So then you get locked out. And
Yep.
again, why didn't he get locked out? I don't think he did.
And what
No.
Twitter does, no, he did not. But what Twitter does is they give you an ultimatum. They say you delete the tweet for a punishment of 12 hours or go through an appeal process where the
Did I show that, by
terms-
the way, when I was talking about that? Or no? Was I not showing it that whole time?
I
What's
didn't see it pop up on the screen, but
Or what's the go? Tanny, continue. What's the appeal
Sorry.
process?
Yeah.
so basically
Sorry.
the appeal process is you basically send them a message. They give you, a reason. Hey, explain why you're actually in the right and you shouldn't be, canceled. But we can't guarantee that this will work or that it will be done in a timely manner, that the decision will be made in a timely manner. So basically, you are the only way most people will go is, especially if you're trying to do work on Twitter, like you're trying to spread
Right.
your work. I had something that evening. I have plans, for the next few days. I was like, okay, I just have to delete the tweet because I don't trust that Twitter will get back to me in any period of time that's reasonable. And so I wouldn't be able to use my account. They basically, with your first strike, you can't do anything but direct message someone. But you can't send anything by direct message either. You can only send text through direct message. So
Oh, you can't link to anything. That's interesting.
No.
Why is that necessary? That's a weird thing.
and it's very dubious too, because people thought that I was still active, because my profile was still there. They didn't
And
completely.
they're like,
it wasn't
why
like a second
hasn't
or
he
a third strike.
tweeted? Where is
Yeah.
Danny? What a coward. How could he not
Exactly.
comment on this? Whatever this is. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, that was a scandal. Me coming to comradely reply
Defense,
to
yeah.
Wyatt. Yeah, comradely defense to Wyatt, who was trying to, you know how these blue checks are. They try to come after you and they
Right.
try to. I mean, it always
Or for
backfires usually
dictatorship,
for
yeah.
people like us. It's like, who do you think follows us?
Right. Yeah. You should put that in your Twitter bio. In fact, I'm a little disappointed it's not already there. Why?
There's time yet. I was
Yeah.
hoping I might, sucker him to saying something even worse.
Even
Some
worse.
more-
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
You
see.
never know. Yeah. It is funny he didn't block you. Maybe
Yeah,
someone
I
blocked
need
him
to
out
take
of his
advantage
account.
of it. I need
Yeah,
to kind of
we gotta
assemble
provoke
like
him.
a whole
Oh
Keith
man. if-
Olbermann playbook for just
Right.
like picking together his little weaknesses. Get back to me if y'all aren't busy this weekend.
Yeah. If only he weren't blocked by me, I would chime in, but he won't see it.
Can I ask a question? I feel like I'm going to be like Grandpa Time over here, being like, "Well, back in my day, the internet was different." I'm just curious, like, on this,
Sam's still on AIM.
yeah, those emojis are good.
XOXO Sam.
Yeah.
icon.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. No, but I'm curious, like, when I was coming up, there was indie media, right? And so what you had something that was controlled by activists, and you had the Newswire on the left side of indie media.
I
And
remember
people would
that,
post political stuff. They post pictures. They could post video. I mean, it was primitive in some ways. But when major demonstrations were going down or massive, big political events were going down, I would be in a computer lab somewhere, just like hitting reload. Like, come on, give me endorphins. I need to know what's happening next. And it's now we sort of live in Twitter, in Zuckerberg's world, in all this blue check bullshit. and YouTube, and it's owned by all of our class enemies. It's owned by these are all capitalist enterprises that get to determine who gets the blue check. We don't know. We can talk about shadow banning. We don't even understand how the algorithm works. Who is seeing it of our audience? Who is it being limited to? How they're sort of tricking on it.
Right.
And so I'm just curious, like, is some of this about sort of lamenting this, just the state of the world? And some of this, does the left need to start creating alternative online institutions where we don't get censored, we don't get limited, we can reach the largest audience possible, and figuring out sort of like, how do we build the new world among the corpse of the old Twitter? To terribly paraphrase Gramsci.
That's a tough question. I'm going to be honest. I mean, people go to these social media websites for a specific reason. And honestly, a lot of the work that we do is on some level is like, whoops, you wanted to see like fun cat pictures. Now you're hearing about a coup that's happening that you didn't know about, you know? So
come for the cat picture, stay for the coup analysis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously, you got to get people. Yeah.
Well,
so if but just the problem there is like, if we're trying to create some social network that's like aimed around some kind of leftist goal, then we're going to end up just at a kind of a feedback loop. You know what I mean? It's a difficult question, honestly. I don't think that's one that has really any terribly easy answers.
Well, we're definitely in a situation that's just rife with contradiction. I mean, that's what, Sam, you're pointing to. And
what is to be done, guys?
Exactly. What is to be done? What Lenin said. And I think part of this is, so, the masses, the people, they are on Twitter. They're on these platforms. I mean, this is how people are consuming media now, right? YouTube is one of the biggest search engines. Twitter is TikTok. By far one of the biggest. Yeah, TikTok now is becoming
Danny's big on TikTok. Danny does a lot of TikTok stuff. I see.
There's left-wing TikTok.
I know. I'm trying to tap into it.
Yeah, the Zoomers are zooming. They're zooming ahead on TikTok, but it's a slow go for me. Katie's being very generous there. But yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, we do need to be on these platforms because that's where people are, and we need to ensure that our work is there. But at the same time, it is true. There is a need. And I think people are starting to get to this place of, okay, yeah, there is a need to create independent channels. But then we come up against the class reality, which is the media space is monopolized. I mean, the U.S. is the monopolized media apparatus of the world, really. It's so heavily concentrated, the way that the corporate control of the media is so heavily concentrated. It presents all sorts of barriers financially and just practically, right, to creating independent institutions. And that requires a level of organization that I think we're all trying to figure out. So, in my opinion, I think it's sort of, we are always going to be on both sides of that question, and I think how we negotiate that is always going to be determined by the present moment. In the present moment, most people are on the class enemies institutions, and so we are fighting really hard to ensure that we are seen and able to be. One of the downsides of all of this too is that it reflects that journalists like Wyatt, like myself, we have a hard time, receiving any compensation at all for our work. So I had the state affiliated media panel, and I can tell you that very few outlets outside of Press TV and CGTN are willing to compensate journalists like us for covering the foreign policy, for covering imperialism. And I think our reliance on social media, on Facebook, on YouTube is part of that. It's kind of like we have been atomized to this degree where we need to rely on this also to spread our following and to increase our capacity to do this work financially, because we live under a capitalist system, and we do need to make a wage in order to survive, as Karl Marx told us so astutely.
Right. And what else? how else does that impact your work? I mean, it makes you, so you have to go onto these platforms, not to vilify these platforms, but it's like your views aren't allowed to be, or even the content that you're focused on isn't allowed to be platformed on other forms of media. Then you go onto certain platforms and then you're called a whateverist, a Putinist, a tanky, a China stan, whatever, insert the insult. And there's a lot of this that we see where people are smeared for appearing on some platform that has someone else on it, or accused of, being associated. And there's not as much of a focus on why someone has to go a certain place to even get their perspective out there.
Well, I was just on looking up something on the Gray Zone, and the Gray Zone piece was linked to somewhere, and then on Metafilter, and then it was deleted because which is a website that aggregates the web that a bunch of people read. It's like a proto Reddit, and it was deleted because it was from the Gray Zone. They were like, the Gray Zone is not a trustworthy source, which I think comes down from Wikipedia, and the related wiki institutions have given Gray Zone some kind of listing that they're not a reliable source.
They're a deprecated source.
Yeah, they're a deprecated source. And it's what's happening.
Max Blumenthal is very self-deprecating, but that's different. Yeah.
No, but very seriously, what happens is there's questions about who's in the leadership, who's on the board of Wikipedia, and what they're able to do and control with the sourcing, who's writing it, who's editing it. Yeah. But it's also like Wikipedia is setting the terms for what is a deprecated source across the internet. So sites that aren't formally tied to Wikipedia are like, well, we can't trust it because Wikipedia doesn't trust it. And then suddenly it's like the link disappears.
Right.
Yeah.
It is. It's soft censorship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wyatt, do you want to talk about your experience or to follow up on what Katie was saying?
Well, I mean, I wasn't forced to take my tweet down or anything, although obviously, the kind of language that's being used is it tells you exactly what they think about us. And I mean, honestly, though, it is wild that somebody as well paid as Keith Olbermann, who was paid tens of millions of dollars, and who really didn't seem to have that many sincerely held beliefs. When you look at his comments about, I should probably apologize to George Bush. This was how he was.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because I pretended he was so terrible, but now Trump, this guy's a real menace.
Right.
Everyone should believe Keith Olbermann now because he was lying before, but now this guy's the real.
What about
threat.
WMD? Should we also believe that?
We should probably apologize to George Bush for.
Yeah, we should. We should pay him.
Lie.
We should pay him reparations. We should make Iraqis pay him reparations.
Right.
Actually,
but we could have him pay him in shoes at press conferences.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I do want to say though that Keith Olbermann becomes very passionate about that. I'm suspicious. I mean, I don't have proof of this. I don't know if Keith Olbermann was the one who reported me, right? But given the ratio of the tweet, I don't know how. I don't think many people who would report me saw the tweet. A lot of people who were, most of the people, the vast majority, 90%, were people who were ratioing him because of how idiotic it was what he was saying. But I do definitely want to say that Keith Olbermann has a history of, actually advocating censorship on Twitter. In July, he called Jimmy Dore a feral succubus and tagged on Twitter, tagged Jack and said, hey, he needs to be banned, so and then he did the same thing to Tim Pool, I think. So, he has this crusade. Russiagate was all about this crusade of trying to lump the left and the right together under this grand Russian conspiracy, so-called. And his crusade of censorship is something he thinks is righteous. He says this is different. He's not advocating government censorship across the board. He is selectively choosing who should be taken off of these platforms based on their worldview, based on how they approach and talk about certain issues. And essentially anyone who doesn't agree with Russiagate or anyone who doesn't agree with the liberal class on everything should be taken down. And that's kind of the predicament that we're in, because most people who are attacking us don't tend to be on our farthest right. They tend to be in the Democratic Party establishment, like Keith Olbermann.
Well, and what you see from this, right, is like it's such a clarifying moment to me, because if Keith Olbermann had been able to prove me wrong, when I debunked this like obvious propaganda piece, if he'd been able to prove anything wrong, then he would have, but he couldn't. So he called me a dictator's whore, which is just like, like that's something that I might have done maybe if I was like a 12-year-old, it's just like, well, like I'm angry and like I can't think of anything to say, But like he's a highly paid media professional who's been doing this entire life, and it kind of just shows you how like mediocre and really just bland the media class is, the ruling class in general. They're just not that bright and kind of easy to make fun of, which works out for our advantage from time to time, but.
It was an epic cell phone. It was a real epic cell phone.
That's for sure.
You're muted. Katie, you're muted.
Okay, you got muted. Katie.
Yeah. Okay. Am I unmuted now? Also, like nothing that you said was so offensive about it. It was documented. You were in the country he's talking about. He just, I guess, like really couldn't handle it. But it just goes, it just shows like how, and it's just funny because I think they're supposed to be. He claims to be this on the side of civility.
Mm-hmm.
Him
right.
and George Bush, and you're literally just pointing out images of like, how dare you push back on the New York Times is
exactly like the audacity of this
reporting.
This somebody who little nobody reporter, like how dare he go down there and say this, and I just They can't stand it. It's on the one hand because we make them look terrible, and on the other hand because they're so invested in creating these narratives that legitimize their whole profession. They're extremely invested in delegitimizing these elections because as Ben was pointing out earlier, the opposition here is simply way too unpopular to ever win an election democratically. Right. Just like in Bolivia, they spent years and years and years thinking, how can we get back into power? Well, we're not going to stop being self-interested, just like jerks. Like, we're not going to stop being greedy assholes. We're definitely, we're not going to unify around one particular candidate. That's not going to happen because we all want to be president. Instead, we're just going to try to destroy the whole system. We're going to launch these, work with the U.S. As their tools as they launch this hybrid warfare, this low intensity economic media war that we're seeing really like the next stage of right now. This is the turning point at which Nicaragua, according to the establishment media, became like Cuba and Venezuela.
Right.
Yeah.
And what else do you guys want to talk about? Any of the like original reporting that you're doing, Wyatt? What do you want people to know about since you're on this show?
We had a press conference today featuring a bunch of the journalists who came here, a bunch of the electoral accompaniers. They came together basically to repudiate and refute the massive series of lies that Joe Biden pushed out the other night in his statement on Nicaragua, and also to refute the numerous lies that are being put out by the mainstream media. So that's something I think folks should keep an eye out for. This is going to be, it's been going up. We've been uploading clips all day. So keep you guys posted on my Twitter feed. We'll definitely have that coming out. I don't want to promise too much, but I'm hoping to be able to get an interview with Laureano Ortega, who's the son of the president, and he's involved with international investments, because I'd like to get his take on the impact of the sanctions so far and what the Renacer Act, which they timed very specifically, I'm sure, to be able to make this, next 2 weeks just all about Nicaragua, right? Last week was Nicaragua's elections are a sham. Next week is going to be Joe Biden finally signs the Renacer Act so that he can help restore democracy in Nicaragua. Blah 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 blah.
Right, and actually, a lot of part of the reason I'm doing this show is because I had on I had on Ro Khanna. And one of the things that I asked him about, because I asked Twitter, what should I ask him? And Aaron Mate said, ask him about Nicaragua, which I did. And then he had an answer that then Aaron Mate, everyone can check it out. It's on Patreon, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. I'll be clipping it. But if you want to catch it now, and it's a full breathtaking existence, go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. But, you know, Ro Khanna's answer was like, sanctions against Nicaragua are justified, but not against Israel, which is, if you're talking about what these countries are doing on a human rights level, is like kind of hilarious. But I want to get into the Renacer Act, but sanctions. But really quickly, wanted to look at this thing that you put out, Wyatt. Point well taken. And we should look at Biden's statement. So this is in response to Biden's statement. And you point out, if the Nicaraguan government was actually no different from the Somoza family that Ortega and the Sandinistas fought for decades ago, the U.S. would be shipping them hundreds of millions of dollars worth of weapons and not trying to overthrow them. And that's, of course, a reference to the dynasty that preceded the Sandinistas, Somoza, and right-wing authoritarian dictator. And this is the statement for who the United States, of course, supported. Was that our son of a bitch? Was he the son of a bitch?
That's the one.
Bitch, but he's our son of a bitch.
It's actually an apocryphal quote, but yes.
All right. Well, that's who it was. Yeah. Well, a lot of FDRs were. So here's the statement, which we should just briefly look at. Trigger warning: major bullshit coming down the pike from Biden. I wish you could make it bigger and anyway, when Nicaragua President Daniel Ortega and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo, orchestrated today was a pantomime election that was neither free nor fair and most certainly not democratic. The arbitrary imprisonment of nearly 40 opposition figures since May, including 7 potential presidential candidates. Remember, I'm a potential presidential candidate. You guys are potential presidential candidates. We all are. And the blocking of political parties from participation rigged the outcome well before election day. They shuttered independent media, locked up journalists and members of the private sector, and bullied civil society organizations into choosing their what does that say?
Could you put your pencil, your glasses like all the way down your nose while you're reading? I feel
What
like
is
you're
that
gonna
word?
open a
they're
I
closing
can't
their
even see
doors.
it.
I thought they were choosing their dupes. Yeah, how the hell am I supposed to do this? Here, you know what I'm gonna do? Watch this. Here, I know what I'm gonna do. Jesus Christ. Hold on. All right.
Yeah.
I figured it out. I know how to do this. Show Finder. Drag it into a window. Do you guys know that you can drag images into? This is great. Oh, this may not work actually. Oh, no,
Do you
it
want
will.
me to read the rest of it?
I got it. Hold on. Do I what? Don't make fun of me.
I said I can read the rest of it if you want.
No, I got it.
Okay.
I was chiding Sam. Hold on one second. Okay. All right, there we go. Oh my God, I can relax now. All right. I thought that into choosing their dupes. Okay. And bullied civil society. Oh wait, am I showing it? No, it's not on.
No, it's okay.
You can't read it anyway. It's too
Fablum. It's Fablum.
So small. It's so small.
There.
Oh, look at
small-minded.
that.
You see? You see?
Okay. All right.
All right. You have little faith. Hold on. All right. There. All right. All right. Long unpopular, now with a Democratic mandate. Now without a Democratic mandate, the Ortega Murillo family now ruled Nicaragua as autocrats, no different from the Somoza family that Ortega and the Sandinistas fought 4 decades ago. The United States stands in support of the inalienable right to democratic self-determination of the Nicaraguan people and those of any other country in the hemisphere where popular sovereignty is compromised by the erosion of democratic norms, stifling of civic space, or violations of fundamental rights. The Inter-American Democratic Charter obligates the hemisphere to stand up for the democratic rights of the Nicaraguan people. We call on the Ortega Murillo regime to take immediate steps to restore democracy in Nicaragua. and to immediately and unconditionally release those unjustly imprisoned for speaking out against abuses and clamoring for the right of Nicaraguans to vote in free and fair elections. Until then, the United States, in close coordination with other members of the international community, will use all diplomatic and economic tools at our disposal to support the people of Nicaragua and hold accountable the Ortega Murillo government and those that facilitate its abuses. All right.
So not the most important point, but
yeah,
it's so wild that he's saying they're long unpopular when, like, the same day this came out, a poll came out showing him with a 38% approval rating. Like,
Yeah.
you have a way lower approval rating. Like, maybe don't.
showing Biden. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh
Yes.
yeah, Kamala Harris 28%. So
Oh my God, it's in the
they're
toilet.
they're killing it. They're killing it.
Yeah, but good enough to lecture.
Right.
Good enough.
Yeah, Katie just.
No, I have to disappear for a second to do something technical. But how would you respond to? What's your response to that? To this, Wyatt?
Well, it's just lie after lie after lie. The 7 potential presidential candidates, as you said, yeah, I thought about, I would like to be president one day. Like, the thought crossed my mind. So now I'm a pre-candidate, right? They shuttered independent media. They shuttered media that received its funding entirely from CIA cutouts. That is true. And by the way, like, I've worked for Sputnik. We're not, like, affiliated with, Russian intelligence or whatever, but we have to go through serious hoops, and we have to register under the Foreign Agents Relations Act. Yep. These are, like, rules that the U.S. itself set up. All these laws that they point out to, they call are authoritarian, are in some way or another ultimately kind of modeled on laws that came out of the U.S. first. So that is a lie. The civil society organizations that had to close their door, they're referring to, again, these NGOs who were essentially the financial channels by which the back channels, sort of financially, by which the CIA was able to pump all this money into this violent coup that lasted for several months and saw over 300 people killed, the majority of them being supporters of the Sandinista party. So all of this, lecturing about the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and then we saw the same stuff about that from the OAS today, about some kind of lecture about the Democratic Charter and the official charter, the OAS. It's like, where was all this in Bolivia? Where was all this energy in Honduras when you guys were slightly taken aback by the fact that Juan Orlando Hernandez literally shut power to the vote tabulation center, and when it came back on, he has a significant advantage. Like, there was no talk, there was no outcry from the U.S. about the sanctity of Honduran democracy. So all of this, it's so blatant that it's political. It's not in any way, the U.S. does not actually care about democratic norms, or they wouldn't have sold $600 million more of weapons to Saudi Arabia the day prior.
And literally have John Kerry shaking hands with Mohammed bin Salman, right? Like a week ago. It's like the double standard for Latin America and the United States and Latin America, or in the United States and the rest of the world. It's like, it's long, it's gross. It's been going on for a while. But I had another question about this, because when we talk about sort of Biden calling it a pantomime election, when we were talking with Camila and Ben before, some of that harkens back to the 1984 election, where Reagan referred to it as a sham election and was totally dismissive of the Nicaraguan election in 84. And it really feels like Biden is sort of like going back to this Cold War mindset in some ways in Latin America. I certainly expected even, maybe to go back to the Obama era with Cuba, and we don't even have that. It's pretty gross under Biden. And so, but Danny, when you were talking about your show about internationalism before, my ears totally perked up. And one of the things I couldn't help but think about is that in the struggle for freedom in Nicaragua in the 80s, there was a huge international component. Yeah. I still have my Libre Nicaragua sweatshirt that used to be my dad's, when we would go and we would do the weekly protests against the Contras when I was a little kid growing up. And I was just curious, like, when you're doing this work on internationalism and talking about how the left needs to have a re-embrace of internationalism, the left, I don't have to tell you all this, has a long history of internationalism. I mean, certainly in Europe, you had the first international, the second international, third international. It kept going on. It was a wonderful tradition. And I was just curious, like, as you're doing that work exploring the idea of internationalism for the left and looking at what's happening in Nicaragua, what's happening in Cuba, what's happening with Venezuela, what's happening with Brazil, what's happening with, the list goes on and on, especially in Latin America. What should people be thinking about in terms of internationalism and being in solidarity with Nicaragua?
Well, that's a huge question, but I think first and foremost, it is both. First, I mean, a lot of the work that I do is about exposing the US's propaganda against a country like Nicaragua, because this is an information war, it's a propaganda war. And you mentioned this sort of return to the Cold War. I think what we're seeing in relation to Nicaragua and several countries in Latin America, and we can extend this outward, China, North DPRK, we're seeing this return of anti-communism, right? Anti-social. It's like this socialist threat, the specter of a socialist threat, which really is the underlying basis for all of the vitriol that's spewed at Nicaragua, because Nicaragua has a multi-party electoral system, yet it receives the ire of the United States, unlike as Wyatt was talking about, like real pro-US dictatorships like in Honduras or Guatemala. There's not this criticism. So first, it's uncovering. In order to be an internationalist, you need to be able to peel through the propaganda and the vitriol. And then it is about developing a real consciousness and understanding of those who we cannot possibly understand from living in the United States and living in the Western world. We have the vast majority of the planet now, being attacked by imperialism and having their development, their courses of development, their self-determination, as Biden so ironically used that term, really arrested because of imperialism. So then it's about, why does the United States spread so much propaganda about a certain number of countries, the countries that it happens to sanction, happens to intervene in? And usually it's because, not always, but generally it's because those countries are charting an independent course of development. Whether you like it or not is, your own personal opinion. But I think at the end of the day, we need to build a real respect for self-determination that's rooted in the Leninist tradition, because that's where the UN got it from. They didn't just get it out of nowhere. They got it from the Leninist tradition, his theory and work, and then understanding how that has developed, as you said, over the course of history. Sam, you mentioned the internationals, right? And how that conversation over the course of history has transpired within the United States and the West. It's been a fraught one. It's been one that's very divisive, and you see it today. You have a lot of people are against wars in the United States today. Not so many people are willing to oppose a new Cold War on China or to oppose U.S. sanctions on Nicaragua, though. So that's where I think the contradiction rests, is you have war fatigue, but now it's about taking the next step in moving people to actively opposing wars and then actively building solidarity. I mean, you had things like sort of a Nicaragua, almost like a Venceremos brigade back during the struggle of the Sandinistas in the 80s.
Resistance in El Salvador.
And you had the Pledge of Resistance, where they literally mapped out every military installation across the country. And what they did was they made pledges that if the U.S. invaded Nicaragua in the same way that we had invaded Vietnam, that we were going to literally, I mean, like, everybody was like, this is the one we're going to go and try to shut down. But they were going to try to shut down the entire domestic military bases.
Yeah. And I've been to Cuba, I've been to China. I know Wyatt has been a lot of different places. I do think that that's also going to be part of this. I'm hoping to generate interest and debate and, discussion politically, and then hoping more people will take, especially journalists, those who are politically organizing, then taking the next step in, okay, I need to see this for myself. I think that's one of the most powerful ways to build solidarity, because it really then builds the foundations for really making it real for people, because the propaganda can feel almost unreal. And Lee Camp was saying this in our conversation yesterday about state affiliate media. It's like people in the United States are so propagandized, and they're constantly told lies after lies after lies. Eventually it becomes so familiar that it becomes like a de facto truth. Even when you tell people that what they're saying, what the corporate media is saying about Nicaragua is a lie, they may not feel empowered or sort of behooved to do anything about it, because it's so familiar to hear anti-Sandinista, anti-Ortega propaganda in the media.
Wait, Wyatt, I want to give you a chance to respond. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it is really important. And I will just say, when I was participating as a electoral accompanier and going along with to a number of voting stations, I did this in the Atlantic coast, the northeast city of Bilwi, it's a heavily mosquito city. Historically, in the 80s, it was kind of a hotbed of like Contra activity. It's the location from which the largest group of the Bay of Pigs invasion was launched. So we are talking about, a city that historically not like a leftist outpost by any means. And I was there 10 years ago. And that would have been, 3 years of Sandinista governance since the neoliberal years at that point. And it was not a great place to be. It was just, everything was muddy. There was like, nothing was paved. All the buildings were made out of rotting wood. There was no reliable power. Running water, practically non-existent. When it would be available for maybe an hour or two a day. And I came back now, and it's incredible. There's like streetlights everywhere. There's paved roads all throughout the city. There's buildings that are made of materials other than wood. There was a new water purification facility that had just been set up, that just went into operation a couple months prior. They have made, there was 1 kilometer of road in this entire northeast region when I was there, or, when the Sandinistas took back over. And now there's close to 500. And so when you ask like, oh, well, why would anybody want to vote for, some dictator, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, because their standards of living have just dramatically and unimaginably increased, a way that is unimaginable for a lot of people in the West, because they've never gone without running water at all. They've never, they had a blackout once in their life, twice in their life maybe. And, it's not something that you can really even explain or put into words until you've actually been there and you've talked to these people and you see how it impacts their life. All of a sudden, there's twice as much life in my life. I can stay awake for 4 or 5 more hours a day. It's life altering. And that is, why we saw such turnout. We saw 65% turnout, which is higher than any US election that I think I've ever heard of. And, it's all being dismissed regardless, because it doesn't matter at this point, right? Where there's just this parallel reality that they've created. And, as Ben was saying, I think soon Violeta Chamorro will be president of Fantasy Nicaragua, like Juan Guaido is president of Fantasy Venezuela. But in real Venezuela and in real Nicaragua, the institutions, the day-to-day life will continue to go on. And luckily, I think for Nicaraguans, it'll be less affected by the economic warfare, because they're self-sufficient. When we talk about agriculture, they produce 95% of the food that they consume. They can't be starved. They can't be, these hit with these kind of food scarcity that would actually lead to some legitimate discontent.
Yeah, really broad, thought-provoking question from Nash98. Blah, 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 blah. Can anyone explain why the left progressives, as it were, have the ideas to advance humanity yet are block censored, when most of all people are inclusively counted with peace as utmost item who could be against the left? Well, I mean, yeah, I would say the people who are power. I mean, that's exactly why they
don't want to give it away.
Is block censored, because those ideas would result in much more democracy.
Do you know how nice a mega yacht
humanity.
is?
A what?
Yeah.
Do you know how nice a mega yacht is? People would
Yeah,
kill
exactly.
To
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it's something I also wanted to point out, that a really important thing that you mentioned kind of in passing, Wyatt, is that often people, human rights, like NGOs and alleged advocates for human rights, will point to like the numbers of deaths in a certain country as evidence that there's an oppressive, murderous dictatorship in power. And often they don't actually show which side was killed. So they'll point to the number of deaths under a certain leader, and it's actually like the Sandinistas will have been killed and something. Same thing with in Bolivia, that happened too, right?
Or the Cuba protests where they showed footage of people
Yes.
pro-government, and they blurred their signs and showed them as the B-roll of the anti-government protesters.
Yeah.
And it's particularly horrific if you know some of the people who were affected by this violence in Nicaragua. You know, I got a chance to interview the daughter of a man named Bismarck Martinez, who's kind of a legend now, but he was a Sandinista member who was going to see his family in Jinotepe, including his daughter, who we spoke with. And he was pulled out at one of these, they're called tranques, these checkpoints, these murder hotspots, rape hotspots. Everyone is basically extorted as they go by. Centers of just the worst type of activity you can imagine. And he was tortured, right? They found out that he was a Sandinista, either depending on what version, you hear, it's either by the shirt or by, they found his ID card. But they brutally tortured him. They're mocking him, singing like Sandinista songs as they're about to just execute him, lynch him effectively. And it's the same thing that you saw in Venezuela with Orlando Gutierrez when they burned him alive. This black man who they assumed was a Chavez supporter was a Maduro supporter because of his race. So we're talking about the same people. And if you spend enough time traveling around Latin America, you realize like the Latin American right is the same everywhere. They say the same things, they think the same things, they scream the same chants. They all try to take back El Pueblo Unido jamás será vencido. Like there's like some playbook.
The woke right wing, yeah.
Yeah, right. But then, you'll find out that they don't have any real problem with the fact that half of them are openly racist and extremely anti-indigenous. None of that's ever a problem until they're like up here at the woke liberal universities or whatever.
Right. And it's a playbook that is really expansive. I mean, I remember when the U.S. invasion of Libya was happening, U.S. NATO invasion of Libya was happening, the corporate media was spreading this disgusting lie, which kind of reflects, a lot of what is being said about Nicaragua and trying to tie deaths to certain to the FSLN, to the Sandinistas. The corporate media, CNN, New York Times, were claiming that Gaddafi's forces were attacking African migrants, were attacking Black Libyans, right? Killing them, raping women, children. And then they would show pictures. They would show pictures of this happening. And it was actually pictures of Libyan Islamic fighting group, the terrorists that the United States was supporting, who were brutally attacking African migrants, construction workers who came from countries like Mali and Niger to make a living because Libya happened to be a hub economically that allowed them to do so, where they would go and work and then go back home after a season or whatnot. So this whole misassociating to justify war, sanctions, it's an addiction that the media has, but it's because the media is so connected to the intelligence apparatus. I mean, that's where the vast majority of sources on any country that the United States is targeting for regime change, the majority of their sources are anonymous, official, and usually that means intelligence.
Language.
Usually that means that they're coming straight from the so-called deep state.
Yeah. Well, this has been really great. Any final words that you want to say? And we'll have to have both of you back on for sure. We barely scratched the surface.
Keith Olbermann, if you're watching, I'm coming for you.
Yeah, and we got Wyatt's back.
And round two for me, Keith.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, for me, thanks so much, Katie, Sam, appreciate it. Wyatt, good to be with you. Comradely to all of you. Camaraderie love to all of you. And yeah, for those of you, follow my work. I write weekly for Black Agenda Report mainly. I'm also, the International's Transmission is on the Left Lens YouTube channel, so go check that out. And then, if you can help sustain my work at patreon.com/JannyHaiphong monetarily, that's amazing. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Oh, I will plug. I will say one. Thank you again to you guys too. It's actually like a real honor to be on the show. I will say we're coming out with a new show in the next couple months with Sputnik on social media. It's going to be called Need to Know, kind of a weekly news roundup. Keep an eye out for that as well.
Name.
Thank you.
Yeah. And any last words about Nicaragua you want to make sure people know? I know that I'm.
Yeah, make sure you keep paying attention, keep following folks like the ones that are in this room right now. It's going to be an important coming months, right? We're in an extremely important time because it's now that the narrative that's going to take hold is being decided. So anything that people can do to push back on the efforts to isolate Nicaragua economically, it's incredibly important.
Yeah. And the Renacer Act, really quickly.
Renacer Act is a threat. It is a threat to kick Nicaragua out of CAFTA, to end the U.S.-Nicaraguan trade. The U.S. is Nicaragua's the number one source, or the number one destination of Nicaraguan exports is the U.S. Obviously, and if you read into the language, it's kind of wild too. There's like some Russiagate angles too. They very much disapprove of the fact that Russia and Nicaragua cooperate, and they want to investigate any potential Russian military activity happening here in Nicaragua. We're going back to the Cold War. So it's time to get on the bus with those of us who are opposing it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and watch the Belt and Road too, because that's part of this as well. China does not, the U.S. does not want China, Nicaragua, and all the Latin American left countries to do business together. I mean, that's a big part of this as well.
Yeah,
for sure.
We have that. We spoke to Esha about that, and I'll be dropping that too. Thank you so much, Wyatt. Thank you so much, Danny.
Yeah.
Sam. Don't forget to bye, Wyatt and Danny. Oops. Sorry, Wyatt. Sorry. Bye. I didn't mean to. I got a little.
Bye.
You're getting soft shadow bans.
I keep. All right.
Okay, Keith.
All right. Keith. Yeah, call me Keith. All right. Bye, guys. I'll send Danny first, so you don't feel bad.
All right. Bye. Thanks again.
Bye.
Okay, take it easy.
That was a great show. Really great show. Thanks for everyone who stopped by. Yes. Make sure that the full show from last time is at patreon.com/Katie Halper Show. But we did this whole great panel, double panel for you guys. And
show your support.
Show your support. Yeah, just do it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sam, for your support, for coming on. We're doing this. We're trying this Tuesday night thing. So I can't. Maybe I will be here Sunday too, actually. But yeah, we're trying Tuesday nights and maybe Tuesday and Sunday. Please hit the like, subscribe, share, all that. Yeah, we got to up the likes during the stream. This was great. Time flies when you're having fun. I thought we were like under 2 hours. I didn't realize we were over. But all right, and see you guys soon. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Rushka. Thanks, Nick. And thank you, viewers, supporters like you. Bye, everyone.